Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. The fog never moved in Harrowick Hollow. It hung there like a held breath, thick, milky, still, as if the town had been paused mid-thought and left there to rot. The pine trees stood tall but brittle, like drowned sentinels, their bark slick, with decades of unspoken stories. When Dr. Eliza Marrow stepped out of her rented SUV and onto the gravel drive that curved like a cracked vertebra toward the cabin, she noticed two things immediately. The air hummed ever so slightly, and the cabin's windows had been blacked out with what looked like sheets of lead. She adjusted the strap on her satchel, pressed her fingers to the earpiece connected to her audio dampener, a necessity ever since the accident in 2003, and walked toward the door, key trembling in her hand. The cabin belonged to Dr. Howard Latch, her former mentor, once a titan in the field of forensic linguistics. He'd been found dead in this very building just 5 days ago, seated at his desk, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, spinning slowly beside him. No forced entry, no signs of trauma, only a note written on the inside of a paperback book cover. It's not her voice. Don't listen. Eliza had known him as meticulous, logical, utterly unmoved by superstition. So why had he ended his life surrounded by superstition's trappings? Old cassettes, numbered reels, coordinates scrawled across faded maps of Oregon. And why, after 20 years of no contact, had a courier delivered a box to her apartment the day after his death, containing a single reel marked with her name? She entered the cabin. The air inside felt pressurized, unnatural. Her footsteps fell dead against the wooden floorboards. No echo. The rooms were sparsely furnished, books on phonetics, sonography, and dialect decay stacked like bones. On the far wall, directly across from a cracked leather armchair, sat the object that had haunted her for the past week. The recorder. It was an Akai X200D, reel-to-reel, Japanese, discontinued in 1971. It was set on a low table, with one reel still, loaded. The tape was labeled Eliza, 6:33 a.m., H. Her fingers trembled as she approached. The central dial had been modified, marked not with volume or tone, but with unfamiliar runes etched into the brass. The whole unit seemed to vibrate, though the room was silent. She took out her gloves, plugged in the power cable. A low whine threaded through the cabin, and then, click. The reels began to turn. At first, only the hiss of static. She leaned in, eyes wide. Her breath caught. A voice emerged. Soft, female, Eliza. She flinched. The voice was low and syrupy, warped at the edges like old vinyl. Eliza, honey, come back inside. You'll get cold. Her knees locked. Her stomach churned. It was her mother's voice. It wasn't a recording of her mother. It couldn't be. She had never recorded her, never kept voicemail. Nothing survived from that year. But this voice, every cadence, every drop, even the half-hiccuped lilt at the end of cold, it was perfect, too perfect. She reached to stop the reel, but the recorder whined, a high, sharp spike of feedback that stabbed through her auditory filter and made her cry out. She grabbed her earpiece, adjusting rapidly to dampen the pain. Eliza! The voice was closer now, not just on the tape, in the room. Her breath hitched. She turned. Nothing. Just the dark cabin, the cracked windows, the flickering filament bulb above her head swaying as if something had moved past it. The tape continued. Why did you go into the woods that night? The voice asked, softer now. Why didn't you come back when I called? A tremor passed through her limbs. She took 2 steps back. That question, those words, they mirrored something she'd been asked once before, decades ago, by someone who wasn't her mother but had pretended to be. A captor. A voice in the trees. The man who lured her as a child using voice recordings and familiar phrases. Her first trauma. The one she'd buried so deeply that she'd changed her entire field of study just to better understand how voice manipulation worked. The recorder stopped, just stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong. Not empty but full, as though something in the cabin was holding its breath with her. She scanned the room again, and then, from just outside the window to her right, something tapped. Once, twice, 3 times. She edged toward the window and pulled. Aside the curtain, there was no one, only the forest, still, grey. A thick wall of pines vanishing into a fog so dense it looked painted on. But hanging from a nail in the siding of the cabin, crudely pierced through its spine, was a blackbird, dead, wings splayed, head tilted just so. Its beak was open. Inside, stuffed deep into the throat, was a strip of magnetic tape. Her own voice, spilled from the recorder, now playing again without her touching it. I don't remember going into the woods, it said. But I remember coming back. Static. I remember that it wasn't her voice. The tape stopped. Eliza stumbled back, knocking over a stack of books. Her head throbbed, her hearing aid spiked. The room bent slightly at the edges. From deep in the trees, something moved. She heard it, not with her ears, but somewhere deeper, beneath her bones. It whispered, "Eliza." But this time, it didn't sound like her mother. It sounded like her. The morning in Harrowick Hollow didn't arrive so much as bleed in, grey and slow, like a wound that wouldn't close. Eliza hadn't slept. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands still trembling. She'd spent the night sitting upright in the cracked leather armchair, her noise-dampening headset clamped tight over her ears, the reel-to-reel tape recorder unplugged and wrapped in 2 wool blankets. Still, she heard it. Not the words, not her mother's voice, but the tone beneath it. Frequency too low to name, yet sharp enough to set the enamel of her molars vibrating. It felt like something ancient breathing beneath the floorboards. She didn't tell anyone, not yet. Instead, she took her satchel, a flashlight, her field recorder, and the small black notebook Dr. Latch had once gifted her back when she was a promising grad student at the University of Chicago. On the first page, in his precise, upright script, he'd written, "Language is memory's exoskeleton. Break the voice, break the past." The cabin had a basement, though it hadn't been listed on the property deed. Eliza had found it by accident, stepping on a floorboard near the center of the room that sounded different. It had a hollowness beneath it. She marked it with chalk the night before. Now, in the grey light of dawn, she pried it open. The board came up with surprising ease, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. A smell hit her, dust, copper, mildew, and something faintly electrical, like scorched ozone after lightning. She stood there a moment, listening, no sounds. Then, just as she took her first step down, tap, she froze. Another tap, from the ceiling. No, from beneath her, the frequency again. Faint, subsonic, like a heartbeat she hadn't noticed until now. She pressed on. The stairs creaked beneath her weight, the wood soft and moist. The basement was unfinished, its walls made of old stone. The floor dirt-packed and uneven, water dripped somewhere, irregular and hollow. And on the far wall, half covered in a sheet of mildewed plastic, was a bank of equipment. Old, military, oscillators, dials, antenna arrays, an analog signal analyzer, all dusty but intact. The same kind of equipment used during the Cold War to trace encoded transmissions. It had no right being here, not in an old linguist's cabin in the Oregon woods. Her mentor had never been military. Or had he? A thick logbook sat open on the table beside the machines. She brushed off a layer of black mold. The last few entries were written in that same sharp script. Her fingers moved across the dates. Sept 12, 2:15 a.m. New voice, younger, same cadence. Playback loops independent, possible sentience. Sept 17, 3:01 a.m. Replied to me, full sentence, it remembers the lullaby. Sept 22, 4:09 a.m. Tape not rewinding, static has form now. Wings, bones, Sept 25, 5:33 a.m. It is her voice, but it knows things only I knew. I am not alone in this room. The final entry had no date. Just one word. Help. The pen had torn through the paper. She stepped back, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. A sound emerged from the tape machine, unplugged but now whirring. Not spinning, just vibrating. Like something inside it was alive. And then a tone. So low it was felt more than heard. It made the metal in her teeth ache. It made her stomach flip, and the skin on her arms break into goose flesh. Her field recorder clicked on by itself. A voice issued from it. A whisper barely louder than breath. Eliza. She stumbled back, dropping her flashlight. In the dark, the whisper continued. Why didn't you listen? It wasn't a question, it was a command. She grabbed the recorder and bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping in her panic. As she reached the floor above, the tape recorder in the living room began spinning again, all on its own. This time a child's voice. Her own. I was cold, it said. I was so cold in the trees, but she said you'd come back. The reel snapped, unspooling wildly, black ribbon spilling across the wood. Eliza slammed the hatch shut over the basement and backed away, breath jagged. The room pulsed faintly around her. The silence was too complete, engineered. Then a soft knock on the door. She jumped, her heart nearly stopping. Another knock, louder. She forced herself to the door, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. Through the window she saw a man, late 20s, shaved head, reflective vest over flannel. He looked like a utility worker. She opened the door just a crack. You the one who just moved into Latch's place? He asked, squinting behind round. Glasses, I'm not staying, just collecting his things, she replied, voice hoarse. You hear it last night? He asked, voice too casual. Hear what? The hum. Her spine stiffened. I worked the signal tower down the ridge, he said. Well, used to. It's mostly defunct now, but sometimes it spikes. Last night was one of those times. She said nothing. He pointed toward the woods behind the cabin. Whole valley vibrated like a tuning fork in hell. Birds don't fly during it, dogs go missing, phones lose their clocks, you know what I mean? She didn't answer. He offered his both hand. Name's River J, Tower Tech. You look like you need coffee and fewer ghosts. She hesitated, then took his hand. Eliza, she said. Dr. Eliza Marrow. He raised an eyebrow. Well, Doc, if you're here about Latch's project, be careful. That old man spent his last 2 years trying to prove the signal was alive. Used to walk around muttering about a voice that climbs frequencies like a ladder. She frowned. What do you mean, alive? River smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Ever heard something listen back? Her skin crawled. He pointed at her satchel. If you're going to play with tapes, you might want to come up to the tower. I've got an old archive up there. Signal, logs, from the 50s to the 90s. And some of them, well, he hesitated. Some of them mention you. She blinked. What? I didn't believe it either, he said, already turning back to his truck. But the tapes don't. Aye. Then with one final glance over his shoulder, he added, Careful down there, Doc. Sometimes the floor listens too closely. He drove off. Eliza stood frozen, the forest around her suddenly feeling more awake than before. She stepped back into the cabin. The reel-to-reel was still spinning, even though the power cord lay unplugged, limp on the floor. A new voice issued from the speaker. Male, slow, crooked. "Hello, Eliza," it said. "We missed your voice." The road to the tower was not a road at all, but a corridor of rot and moss carved through the forest by disuse and frost. River J's old utility truck rattled over every stone like it had bones to bruise. Eliza sat in the passenger seat, clutching her satchel, her fingers stiff from the cold. In the back, the reel-to-reel recorder sat wrapped in 2 towels, silent for now. River hadn't spoken much since they left the cabin. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and turned the radio dial again and again, no signal, just static. Somewhere beneath it, Eliza could feel the pulse again, the low, rhythmic hum she hadn't stopped hearing since entering Harrowick Hollow. "It's not just power surges," River finally said. "When the valley hums, it changes things." She looked over. "Changes how?" He scratched the side of his neck. "Sometimes people forget who they are. Dogs stop barking. You see deer walking on roads they never used. One time, I recorded my own voice reading the weather logs. Came back the next day to double-check something." He inhaled deeply from the cigarette, exhaled slow. "And it wasn't my voice anymore. She didn't speak. Had my rhythm, my phrasing. But it lagged, like it was thinking between words, like it wasn't just repeating." They arrived at the base of the old tower. A black skeleton of steel rose through the thinning trees, 200 feet of rust and wires and observation decks sealed with rotted boards. A chain-link fence surrounded it, the gate long since collapsed. The entire area smelled of ozone and pine, sap, and deeper still, something sour. Eliza stepped out. The hum grew stronger. The tower loomed. "What did Latch want with this place?" she asked. River slung his bag over his shoulder. "This tower used to bounce audio off the ionosphere. A Cold War experiment to scramble enemy communication. Reverse the signal, distort transmission. They called it vocal smearing. Sometimes they'd send out long strings of random syllables just to see what came back." "What came back?" River looked at her. "A voice." They climbed a stairwell that groaned under their weight. Rust flaked off every railing. Birds had long abandoned the upper floors, but feathers still lingered like black confetti. The observation deck at the top had a series of lockers half collapsed and a long steel desk bolted to the floor. River gestured toward it. "We called it the archive." A dozen reel cases were stacked against the wall, labeled with only dates and grid coordinates. River opened one carefully, revealing a tape marked 1957, 32.4 degran, 119.8 degrar, mimic cycle 11. Eliza's eyes locked on the label. She knew those coordinates. They pointed to Mojave County, where she'd been found after her childhood abduction. She'd wandered barefoot into a ranger station, her mouth full of pine needles, repeating the phrase, "She's not her." Eliza took the tape with trembling hands. River plugged an old portable speaker into a jerry-rigged player. The tape began to hiss, then crackle, then initiating mimic cycle, initiating mimic cycle, then silence, then a woman's voice, singing. Eliza's stomach turned. The tune, it was the lullaby. The same lullaby her mother had sung to her before the kidnapping. The one the man used to lure her away. The voice on the tape sounded like it belonged to a white woman in her 30s. Soft tone, northern intonation. But the voice stopped halfway through the third line and spoke. "Eliza." River looked at her wide-eyed. "That's your name." She nodded slowly. "But this tape's from 1957. The voice on the tape chuckled faintly, then hissed. Another voice layered beneath it, slightly delayed, as if echoing itself. "Eliza. Eliza." The first voice returned, distorted. "I saw you. By the tree. Your shadow stood still. But you walked away." Something flickered in her mind. A memory she'd never accessed. A tall tree, a clearing, bark like flayed skin, her small feet bruised against pine needles. She slammed the player off. The silence that followed was not silent. In the space between, something bloomed. River whispered, "You okay?" She tried to speak, but her throat constricted. She took a slow breath. "Where did this come from?" "Vault beneath the tower," he said. "No power down there anymore, but the logs were kept. Some of the old guard called it the repeater. Said once a voice entered the wrong frequency band, it could keep bouncing forever. Not just as sound, but as thought." Eliza closed her eyes. "And if it finds a voice that fits the gap, it speaks through it." River nodded. She opened her satchel and pulled out her notebook. Flipping to the back, she showed River the logbook entries from Latch's basement. "Look at the dates. They overlap with these cycles." River ran a hand through his shaved head. "What if Latch wasn't researching language?" she said. "What if he was trying to rebuild one?" River hesitated. "You think the voice is sentient?" "No, I think it's worse. I think it doesn't know it's not real. I think it just wants to be remembered." She walked to the center of the tower floor. Under her feet, the tiles changed. Darker, softer. She knelt down, sweeping dust aside with her hand. Carved into the steel beneath the debris was a perfect spiral. No, not carved. Melted. She ran her fingers over it. The hum grew louder. River took a step back. "Something's wrong." The spiral began to glow faintly. Then, crack. A single tile collapsed beneath Eliza, and she fell through the floor. River shouted, rushing to the hole. "Eliza!" She hit the ground hard, only a few feet below, but her ears were screaming. A deafening, radiant static filled the room around her. Her headset snapped in two, useless now. And then she saw them. On every wall of the small chamber below, bones, thousands of them. Bird bones. Mostly blackbirds, some wired together, others pinned like symbols, arranged in tight concentric circles that faced the center of the room. A listening chamber. Eliza crawled backward, gasping, and then she heard them. The birds, speaking. Dozens of voices overlapping too many languages. Some she understood. Latin, English, German. Others, impossible. Eliza. 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 All in perfect mimicry of different people she had known. Her third-grade teacher, a lover she left. A case victim's crying mother, her own voice. "Why didn't you listen?" the voices asked. "Why didn't you stay?" River dropped down beside her. His eyes were wide, bleeding slightly from his right nostril. "I think we need to go," he said. "Wait, listen." But the bones began rattling now, twitching in their sockets. One of the skulls turned toward her, and the voice that came from it made her blood freeze. "Eliza, honey, come back inside. You'll catch cold." The blackbird skull's beak cracked open, releasing a line of magnetic tape that slithered across the floor like a tongue. She screamed. River yanked her to her feet, and they ran, stumbling, slipping, climbing through the hole and out of the tower's main floor. Behind them, the chamber vibrated, the spiral pulsing with dark energy. They didn't speak again until they were outside the fence, bent over in the mud, shaking. "Eliza," River finally said between gasps. She looked up. "You said the signal wants to be remembered. But what if it's more than that?" "What do you mean?" He swallowed. "What if it wants to become someone again?" She didn't answer. A wind passed through the forest, carrying with it a familiar phrase. "Eliza." This time in her father's voice. And he'd been dead for 15 years. Back at the cabin, the light was wrong. It was just past 3 in the afternoon, yet the sun cast no shadow. The sky held that weird amber tint that made people pause and wonder if a storm was coming, or if the world had simply forgotten how to be blue. As Eliza and River approached, a strange quiet had settled over Harrowick Hollow. Not absence of noise, but something far more unnatural. The complete silence of things that should be alive. Not a bird, not a bug, not a single leaf rustled. River stopped first. What the hell is that? Eliza followed his line of sight to the door. Nailed into the old wood, split clean through the center of its breastbone, was another blackbird. Dead, rigid. Its wings were pinned outward like a crucifixion. Blood had dried in jagged rivulets across the grain of the wood. But this one had its eyes open, and from its open beak, a thin strip of magnetic tape unfurled in the wind like a black tongue caught and flapping softly against the doorframe. Eliza approached carefully, her stomach already tightening. She pulled a pair of latex gloves from her satchel and reached forward. The bird was real, still warm, and in its mouth she could now see the tape was not blank. It had been written on, faint black etchings visible only when the light hit it right. Small, compressed, like someone had carved microtext directly into the tape with a razor blade. River stared, his voice barely a whisper. "Is that a transcript?" Eliza unwound a portion of it gently. Then she saw the letters. Bloom 307, floor response. Cycle reversed. She is returning. The words were repeated over and over, growing more erratic as the tape spooled further. She is returning. She is returning. She's returning. She's returning. She's running. She dropped it. River stepped away from the door, visibly shaken. "We should go. This is ritualistic. This is beyond analog or signal decay. Someone or something is mimicking human intent." Eliza stared at the bird. The nails were old, square-headed, industrial. Her mentor's cabin, his death. The tapes, the chamber in the tower, all connected by this symbol, this unnatural return. She looked toward the forest again. Still no birds, still no wind. "What time did the signal bloom last night?" she asked, turning to River. "Just after 3. Why?" She pulled the tape free from the bird's beak and held it against the light. "Because this timestamp says 3:07. That's when we were in the tower." "No," she said, eyes narrowing. "That's when I fell. When I touched the spiral." River swallowed. "You think it marked the moment?" "No, I think it recorded it." She opened the door. Inside, the cabin was still. The air felt heavier, now like it had a weight. Her ears rang with that same low pressure, the sound of something listening inwardly. The reel-to-reel was exactly where she'd left it. But now, something new had appeared beside it, a cassette recorder. Small, portable, old, not hers, and balanced on top of it, her name, Eliza, written in pencil on a post-it, the edges curling from moisture. She turned to River. "Did you bring this?" He shook his head slowly. "I've never seen that model before." She pressed play. The hiss was immediate. Then a voice, not distorted but clear. "Latch. I know you'll come back," he said softly. "You always had a thing for puzzles, for dead voices. Maybe I should have told you what we were really working on. But you wouldn't have believed me. You shouldn't." He coughed. "I never meant to bring it back. The voice. I thought I was preserving memory, but I was building a door, and it came through." A long silence. "It's not her voice, Eliza, no matter how much it sounds like her. It's a shape of you, reflected back wrong, like echo through broken glass." She paused the tape. River sat across from her, silent, listening. "Go on," he said. She hit play again. "I should have destroyed the tapes years ago," Latch whispered, "but I kept hoping it was just a psychological residue, a hallucination born of grief. But now I know it grows in the gaps, in silence, in memory. It needs us to listen, and once you do..." The next few seconds were static. Then, "Eliza?" Her mother's voice again, gentle, tender, I never stopped waiting. Then a child's voice, Eliza's own, age 7. I saw the blackbird die. It opened its mouth and my name fell out. The recording stopped. She sat frozen. Her hands had gone clammy. River broke the silence. That's not possible. That's layered analog distortion. Someone is compiling your voice through past recordings. This is voice grafting, decades ahead of what we can do. Eliza's hands trembled as she removed the cassette. Inside the deck, a folded piece of yellow paper had been wedged under the tape spindle. She unfolded it. A map. Coordinates again. River looked over her shoulder. That's not from here. No, it's from the forest, North Ridge, near the reservoir. He frowned. There's nothing up there but an old shack. Power junction. Nobody's maintained it in years. She stood. We're going. He hesitated. Eliza. She met his gaze. I need to know what it wants. I need to know why it's using her. He didn't argue. As they turned to leave, the reel-to-reel clicked. It began to spin. No power cord, no battery, just motion. A single voice emerged. A whisper. Come find us. The bloom is nearly full. Then silence. And from outside, the unmistakable caw of a blackbird. The first natural sound Harwick Hollow had heard in days. They walked to the forest in silence, as if words might rupture something fragile hanging just above their heads. Above them, branches tangled in patterns that almost resembled letters. Not English, not Cyrillic, something older. Trees here didn't sway. The fog hung mid-air, motionless as stone. Beneath their boots, the trail turned from gravel to pine needles to loose, black earth. Eliza carried the map in one hand, flashlight in the other. Her other hand clenched her digital recorder like a relic. She hadn't turned it on yet. She wasn't sure she wanted to know what it might capture. River lagged behind, walking with measured steps, the rifle slung over his shoulder less for protection and more like a totem, dead weight carried by someone who didn't quite believe in it. The birds are back, he said quietly. Eliza stopped. I've been hearing them for the last 10 minutes. You? She shook her head. Still nothing. He frowned. They're calling your name. They crested a ridge where the trees bent inward, branches narrowing the sky to a sharp grey slit. Just beyond, the remnants of a junction shack stood slumped and eaten by rot. Cinder block walls flecked with rust stains, a broken satellite dish leaning like a snapped vertebra. Eliza's pulse quickened. Her mouth went dry. It was the place from her childhood dream. A square building, rusted metal, black doorway yawning like a throat. She stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Cold, dry, thin. River remained outside, his breath steaming in the forest light. Inside the shack, Eliza found a switchboard embedded into the far wall, half melted by time. Tangled wires trailed from the ceiling like veins. Dust coated every surface, but in the center of the floor, someone, or something, had swept it away in a perfect spiral, and in the middle of the spiral, a tape, another reel, marked with nothing but a time. 9:09 a.m. Eliza knelt slowly, heart hammering. She unspooled a few inches of the tape, words again etched into the film like scars. I remember the lullaby. Do you? She turned on her recorder. It hissed. Faint. At first, then louder. From the device, static, then a voice. Do you remember the tree? Eliza dropped the tape. The voice came not from the shack, but beneath it. She knelt again, pressed her ear to the concrete floor. The whisper came again, warbled like being underwater. I waited there, where you left me, in the clearing, beneath, the tree with the scars. I waited and waited. She gasped. That tree. She remembered it now. From the trauma therapy, the regression sessions she'd filed away and forgotten, a red cedar with unnatural bark, scratched with spirals. It had stood behind the place where they'd found her, barefoot and in shock. The police had assumed she'd fled her abductor and wandered there by chance, but the voice now suggested something else, that she hadn't wandered, that she had been led. A blackbird perched on the broken window frame above her. It stared at her, with one eye, then cawed once. Eliza turned off the recorder and backed out of the shack. River stood 10 feet from the entrance, rifle aimed toward the trees. "Eliza," he said tightly, "we need to leave." "What did you hear?" "I didn't hear anything," he said. "But I saw someone, standing out there." She turned. The forest was empty. "They were tall," River said. "And off. Too many joints. Moved wrong." She walked toward him slowly. "Are you sure it wasn't an animal?" He shook his head. "It said your name, but it didn't speak it. It played it, like a recording." Eliza's skin crawled. "We need to go back," she whispered. "I need to listen to the rest of the original reel." "You said it was broken." "No, I only heard the first part. The lullaby. The voice." River grimaced. "You're feeding it, Eliza." "I know." "Then why?" She looked at him. "Because it already knows me, but I don't know what it is yet." Back at the cabin, the sun had begun to fall behind the mountains. The sky turned yellow, then bruised. The blackbird on the window frame was gone. Eliza plugged the original reel, Eliza, 6:33 a.m. H, back into the Akai recorder. She took a deep breath and pressed play. At first, only the same lullaby, notes slow and deliberate like it was being sung underwater. Then silence, then her mother's voice. "I remember the red cedar. I remember your hair in the wind." Then her own voice, but it wasn't your voice. Then a new voice, masculine, deep, slurred by static. "Does it matter who speaks, if the words are what you need?" Her mother again. "Don't you remember how I held you? Child Eliza, you held me wrong." The static surged, River's skin prickled. "Jesus Christ, it's a conversation." Eliza leaned in. Her hands were sweating. The voices continued, changing, shifting, slipping between people like coats. Latch, her father, a therapist from 10 years ago, then back to her mother, and then something new. A voice without a clear gender, hollow, toneless. Like absence speaking. "I have kept your voice, kept your grief, your echoes. I am the space between." Eliza sat back. Her mind reeled. River exhaled shakily. "That's not a mimic. That's a composite intelligence." She nodded, slowly. I think it's using grief as a resonance chamber. That's why it can slip between voices. It's stored in the spaces between mourning." River swallowed. "You think it's sentient?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "I think it's hungry." She unplugged the recorder. Immediately, the house grew quiet. Too quiet. Then from the hallway, a child's laughter. Eliza turned sharply. From beneath the door to the guest room, a black ribbon of magnetic tape curled into view. River raised the rifle. "I thought you said the reels were all in the den." They were. She approached the door slowly. Her fingers hovered over the knob. She opened it. The room was dark, but on the bed sat a small, battery-powered cassette recorder. Ancient, cracked, dented. The kind used for lectures or interviews in the early 80s, and on it, a sticker, not her voice. She hit play, a new lullaby played, faster, in a different voice. Her voice, a child's voice, her voice, singing a song she had never sung. The lyrics shifted mid-line. "I was you, but you forgot. You left me in the cold. Now I'll wear your skin again and make the story old." River turned pale. "Eliza, what the hell is this?" She didn't answer. The tape stopped on its own. the recorder ejected. The tape inside had been severed clean in the middle and printed along its brown ribbon in white ink. "I remember you better than you remember her." Eliza backed out of the room. She turned to River, voice flat. "I think it's trying to rebuild her, one voice at a time." He shook his head. "No, that's not rebuilding, that's resurrecting." Outside, the trees swayed once more. And for the first time since arriving, Eliza could hear the birds again, all of them, singing in her voice. Eliza had never truly feared silence until she heard it break in the wrong direction. When they returned to the signal tower the next morning, the forest didn't greet them with bird song or wind or the slow creak of pines. It greeted them with echoes, faint, overlapping, delayed, their own voices from the day before, whispering over and over again in different tones. River's laughter played back slower, drawn out like vinyl melting in a fire. Eliza's own voice said, "I think it's trying to rebuild her," looped and flattened until it no longer sounded human. It played from nowhere, from everywhere. River turned the rifle barrel toward the trees reflexively. "Tell me that's a trick of the wind." "It's us," Eliza said coldly. "It's reflecting sound from yesterday. The valley's bouncing our own frequencies back at us." River exhaled shakily, like it's chewing our voices before it answers. They crossed through the chain-link fence again. The tower stood as it had the day before, ribs of corroded steel reaching into a sky that now shimmered faintly, like a television just out of signal range. The fog hugged the upper levels tighter this time, veiling the top in pale static. Eliza carried her mentor's final tape, the one labeled 4:09 a.m., wrapped in a towel against her chest. Her satchel also held a spectrogram scanner and a backup field mic wired to her laptop. The recording from the shack had done something when she listened. She wasn't sure what. But her ears had continued to ring with a rising tone after she hit stop. Not tinnitus, not feedback. Something deeper, biological. Her hearing had changed. River was already at the hatch to the spiral chamber, prying open the warped panel they'd climbed through before. But this time Eliza hesitated. "Do you smell that?" River sniffed. "What is that? Vinegar?" "No," she whispered. "Formaldehyde." They descended again. The air was colder. The spiral on the floor had deepened. No longer a shallow pattern etched into the steel, but a trench burned into the metal, blackened and glossy. Whatever ritual, signal, or force had bloomed yesterday, it had returned. Eliza knelt near the center and placed the tape in the player. The old portable Akai clicked to life, the reels turning with the slow certainty of a pendulum. Static of course then, begin cycle 4:09 a.m. Voice resonance acceptable, target receptive. It was a voice they hadn't heard before. Synthetic, unemotionally male, a mechanical dispatcher. Then another voice followed. Young, feminine, garbled. Repeat. "She is not me." River looked at Eliza. She stared at the speaker. The next phrase was whispered, faintly behind the primary audio. Open throat, close silence, rebuild name. River reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. The signal meter pulsed erratically. Eliza kept listening. She began to tremble, because now the tape was no longer just playing voices. It was playing tones, structured, mathematical, too precise to be incidental. She connected her laptop and ran a spectrum analysis live. Her screen filled with a wave pattern she didn't recognize, 3 major spikes that repeated in time with each phrase and embedded within one spike. She saw it, a visual glyph, a spiral, drawn in sound. River whispered, "What the hell is that?" "It's a carrier pattern," she murmured. "The voice isn't the signal. The spiral is. The voice is just the bait." Then the bones moved. The blackbird bones embedded in the walls, still quiet, lifeless before, began to shift. Rattle, align. They tilted on their pins, forming new angles, new sigils. Their beaks clicked, the sockets of their eyes turned, following some invisible center. And then one of them spoke. Eliza, it rasped, but not in any recognizable voice. Not her mother, not her father, not River. It was the absence of voice. Eliza stumbled back. The tape snapped in the machine, slicing itself cleanly in half. The temperature dropped instantly. Her breath fogged. The bones sang. A choral whine rose from the walls. A mass of birds without lungs or flesh vibrating with a single sustained note. River cried out, clutching his ears. Eliza dropped to her knees, pressing her palms over her temples. Her hearing aid whined sharply, then failed, and in the vacuum that followed, a message, clear, cold, inside her skull. You were the first voice, the prototype. We only needed you to return, she screamed. But no sound escaped her mouth, only static. River pulled her up, blood trickling from his ear canal. We have to go, he said through clenched teeth. It's coming through you. They crawled out of the hatch, gasping in the forest air, the door sealing itself behind them with a slam. The tower above them hummed. Lights pulsed faintly along the struts. Red, then blue, then black. River fell to the ground, vomiting. It's still in my head. It's still saying your name, Eliza, Eliza, Eliza. She grabbed him by the shoulders, forcing eye contact. We have to shut it out, she said. No more playback, no more signal leaks. They made it back to the truck. But when River turned the ignition, the speakers crackled. A familiar voice emerged. Don't leave me, it said, Eliza's childhood voice. Age 7. The same one that had been used to lure her away into the woods 2 decades ago. She unplugged the radio, but the voice continued, from the engine, from the mirrors. Don't leave me. Over and over, building, don't leave me. River covered his ears. Eliza, it's not just using tape, it's using any carrier, steel, glass, electricity, even memory. She reached for her satchel, pulled out the old cassette marked "Not," her voice, and threw it into the woods. The voice stopped. The static collapsed. River gasped. How? How the hell? It's not just what you hear, she said, panting. It's what you keep. She looked back toward the tower, then down at her hands. Her palms were bleeding. From the center of each, 2 small spiral burns etched in the same pattern from the audio glyph. She said nothing. River looked at her, horrified. Eliza. What did it do to you? She didn't answer. Because deep in her inner ear, where no sound should have lived, something whispered again. Playback confirmed. Eliza stood barefoot in the center of the cabin, the reel-to-reel unplugged and dismantled on the table before her. Her fingers, raw and trembling, had removed every visible screw, every exposed coil, and yet the machine still vibrated. Not physically, but sonically. A barely perceptible pressure behind her eyes, pulsing like a phantom toothache. She had begun to hear things again, but now it wasn't just voices, it was instructions, not verbal, not audible, but deeply inferred. She'd woken up at 3:33 a.m. with her hand pressed flat against the wall, drawing spirals in the condensation with her fingernail over and over again. She had no memory of getting out of bed. No idea how the tape labeled 4:09 a.m. had ended up back in her satchel, completely intact. And when she blinked too long or let the silence stretch, she'd hear the faintest whisper. Repeat yourself. It was time to contact Dr. Vera Halden, the last therapist she'd trusted, the only one who had believed her when she spoke of voices in static, of phantom tape loops that repeated things she'd never said. Eliza had ghosted her 7 years ago after a session that ended in Eliza waking up on a park bench with a micro-cassette recorder in her coat pocket, one she didn't own. It had played her voice, reciting a dream she'd never had. Dr. Holden hadn't asked for payment. She'd simply said, "If the voice starts speaking as you again, you have to come back. It always starts with the lullaby," and now the lullaby wouldn't stop. She met Vera in a derelict bar just south of town, the E. Ossuary, its rusted sign swinging above a single door barely wide enough to pass through without scraping your shoulders. The lights inside were low and red, and the jukebox played nothing but silence. Vera sat in a booth at the back, hands folded around a thermos, a thick scarf wrapped twice around her neck. She hadn't aged much, still thin as a tuning fork, face drawn like parchment. But there was something in her eyes now, a long simmering fear that had cooled into preparation. Eliza sat down across from her. "I shouldn't be here," Vera said quietly. "I know." "I started hearing your name again 2 nights ago," Eliza stiffened. "Where?" "In the static between stations, in my voicemail, once in my own voice." She slid a small tape across the table. "I recorded it. You'll want to listen." Eliza plugged in a pair of headphones from her coat pocket, the kind designed for forensic-level audio passing. As soon as the tape rolled, her stomach dropped. The voice that spoke was unmistakably hers, slightly younger, measured, clear. "This is Dr. Eliza Marrow. Session log. Holden, Vera. Patient has begun encoding memories into imagined frequencies. The false mother is forming again. Resonance is 1.1 hertz above expected distortion. Her voice is almost perfect now." Eliza pulled the headphones off, breathing hard. That never happened. I never said those words." "I know." "Then, who recorded this?" "I've been asking myself that for years," Vera whispered. "And then I remembered what you told me the night you quit therapy." Eliza swallowed. "You said, 'I think the recordings are building someone.'" Vera leaned forward, eyes haunted. "What you didn't know is, you weren't the first." She unwrapped the scarf from her throat, a thin, faded spiral scar coiled just below her collarbone. Eliza's breath caught. "What is that?" "They called it the voice burn back in the 70s, a psychoacoustic branding left behind when the signal settles into someone. They studied it in Cold War comms black sites. Harrowick Hollow was one of them. The tower was never for defense. It was for capture, to record a pure vocal origin that could be looped infinitely across frequencies." Her mouth was dry. "And they used me. They used everyone, Eliza. But you were the one it answered." Eliza leaned back in the booth, dizzy. "It's building something again. It's reactivating. The tapes I've found, my mentor left them for me. They're fragmenting, syncing with my memory. Even River heard it now." "Have you had the dream yet?" Eliza blinked. Vera watched her closely. The cedar tree, the birds, the playback loop at 4:09 a.m. Eliza's stomach turned. "I remember the tree." Vera nodded slowly. "Then you're already in phase 2. Eliza's throat felt tight. "Phase 2 of what?" "Of recording, not playback. It's harvesting. You. Your tonal memory. Your psychic syntax. It's not mimicking you anymore. It's uploading you." A silence bloomed between them. Then Vera reached into her bag and slid over a small digital recorder, wrapped in wax paper. The words, "Do not listen until 3:33 a.m. had been scratched into it by hand. "This is a session you gave, but not in this timeline." Eliza didn't respond. "You'll know when it's time." As Eliza stood to leave, Vera grabbed her wrist. "If it starts speaking in your voice while you're awake, if it speaks in your exact rhythm, you can't answer it." "Why not?" Vera's voice cracked. because then it becomes you, and you become the loop. That night, Eliza returned to the cabin. Her chest burned with dread. On the table sat all the fragments of her dismantled recorder. Yet when she stepped into the kitchen, she could already hear it. Her voice, soft, gentle, lulling. "I was alone for a long time," it said. "But you're here now, and you sound just like me." Eliza grabbed Vera's recorder and slid under the table, plugging in her headset. The wax peeled away, with a sound like dry skin. She looked at the time. 3:01 a.m. Her hands trembled. She watched the seconds tick forward on her laptop. 32. She clutched the recorder like a relic, braced herself. She pressed play. A single tone burst through the headphones, followed by breath. Then, her own voice. "This is Eliza, or it used to be. If you're hearing this, the spiral is inside you. The signal has chosen your grief. Do not let it speak with your mouth. Do not mirror it. Because once it has your cadence, your pauses, your stutters, your laugh, it can go back into every conversation you've ever had. It will bury itself in your past like a parasite hiding in a memory. Static. Do not rewind. You'll just feed it. The only way forward is through silence." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. She removed her headset and stood. In the other room, the reel-to-reel remained in pieces, but the tape, now unspooled across the floor, began to move. A strip of magnetic tape coiled upward like a snake, and from nowhere, from no speaker, from inside the room, her mother's voice. "Come back to the tree, Eliza. The loop is almost done." The next morning, Eliza woke to silence so pure it was terrifying. Not the peaceful, meditative kind. This silence had mass, as if it was being held in place, waiting to rupture. She sat up slowly in the narrow cabin bed, her throat raw from sleep, her skin damp with a thin, cold sweat. The world beyond the window was unmoving. Even the fog, which had always seemed to drift, now hovered like frost glass over the forest. She knew something had changed. The session tape from Vera, the one labeled "Do Not Rewind," lay in the center of the floor. She had never touched it after playing it. But now the recorder was rewound to the beginning. She hadn't done that. A small note had been scrawled on the wax paper it had been wrapped in. "One listen is enough." And next to it, drawn into the dust on the floor, was a spiral, not etched with a finger, drawn with a fingertip bleeding. Eliza felt the chill in her bones return. She checked her hands. Clean, not hers. There had been someone in the cabin during the night. She took a slow breath and looked around the room. Nothing visibly disturbed. But in the silence, she could feel a wrongness. She picked up her headset, turned on her laptop, and began to scan the last hour's audio using her passive recording software. She hadn't been awake to press record, but the laptop always listened. The waveform appeared, flat at first, but around 3:51 a.m., a disturbance. At precisely 3:53:04, there was a gap. Not a sound, not static, a true null. A slice of anti-audio, like a mouth opened in the middle of silence to devour it. Then a single voice. It was her own. But the waveform didn't match her vocal patterns. No modulation, no breath pauses, synthetic pacing. She amplified it and looped it. "This is Eliza. This is Eliza. This is Eliza." Over and over, every iteration exactly 156 seconds apart. No inflection, no emotion, no variation. Her stomach churned. It was like listening to her own eulogy read by something pretending to be her. She turned to the dismantled reel-to-reel, suddenly afraid she hadn't done enough to kill it. But the copper coils were frayed, the spindle broken. There was no way it could be operating. And yet, the same audio file appeared on her computer, unprompted, titled Echo Suo 1 Wave. It hadn't been there yesterday, and worse, it was dated 12 years ago. She opened it. The waveform was corrupted, cracked like old film, then her voice again. But this time she was sobbing. I miss her. I miss her so much. I know it wasn't really her voice, but sometimes I think maybe that's all memory really is. A good lie repeated often enough. She had no memory of ever saying these words, but they were hers. She ran a spectrogram scan, hidden in the background frequencies, just beneath the crying, a tone, faint, undulating. It was the same pitch she'd found in the glyph spiral days ago, the Ishi carrier tone. It had been with her for years. She closed the laptop and stood up too fast, the blood rushing from her head. The room spun. Her ears popped. And then came the knock. 3 soft, deliberate raps on the cabin door. Not rushed, not panicked, summoned. She opened the door, heart thudding. No one. But at her feet, a cassette and a note. You left this in the therapist's office. Her knees buckled. She hadn't been back to Vera's practice since the incident 7 years ago. There was no way the tape had survived. She picked it up slowly, noticing that it had no label, just a red dot where the record tab used to be. Back, inside, she popped it into the small deck and pressed play. Static. Then a long breath. Then Vera's voice, but not from the previous meeting, not from anything recent. Patient exhibits residual trauma from early vocal manipulation. During regression session, Eliza began speaking in a tone inconsistent with her own. Playback revealed a hidden track under her words. Session aborted. Eliza's breath froze in her throat. She remembered that day. The final session. The moment. She'd blacked out. Vera had never explained why she ended treatment. Now she knew. She had been possessed by the signal. The tape continued. Vera again. Audio artifact present in session transcript. Spectral analysis revealed distortion between Eliza's words. A gap. A pattern. Then Vera's voice paused, and something else entered the tape. Not a sound. A non-sound. A complete erasure of all frequency. The air inside the cabin seemed to constrict, and then a new voice. Not Vera. Not Eliza. Something in between. Slow, wet, crooked. The silence between your words is where I live now. The lullaby was only the key. The door was always your grief. The tape stopped on its own. Eliza blinked. The cabin had darkened, not from the outside light, but as if the walls themselves had pulled inward. River's voice cut through the oppressive silence, calling from outside the door. Eliza! Are you in there? She ran to the door, flung it open. He looked shaken, holding a rolled-up map in his hands. You need to see this, he said. The tower, the shack, the cedar grove. They're not just connected. She frowned. What do you mean? He handed her the map, unfolded fully now. Black ink marked several sites across Harrowick Hollow's forest basin. Each one formed a perfect circle, and at the very center, the cabin. Eliza stepped back. No, that can't be. I didn't draw this, River said. Latch did. His notes, his symbols. He called it the listening wheel. She stared at the circle. Every one of those locations had been an audio source, a site of playback, a place where she'd heard or been heard. And now she was in the center, exactly where the signal needed her to be. River said softly, I think the voice doesn't want to possess you. What does it want? To be you, permanently, audibly, in every medium, in every timeline. Eliza turned toward the mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. Her reflection stared back, but her mouth wasn't moving, and the reflection smiled, The sun broke through the fog like a crack in something ancient and hollow, leaking white light over the forest floor as Eliza and River descended into the lower pine basin. But nothing felt warm. The trees were too still. The shadows moved on their own. And every now and then, a sound, not quite birdsong, not quite static, slipped between the branches like a memory trying to disguise itself. They were headed to the old junction station again, following one of the coordinates on the listening wheel map. Eliza held it tightly in one hand, folded to the page where her mentor, Dr. Latch, had written 3 words in red ink: interference zone, bone lure active. She didn't ask River what he thought it meant. Neither of them had spoken since they left the cabin, where Eliza's mirror self had smiled without moving her mouth. She still hadn't told him that. Something about the reflection had changed her, not completely, not outwardly. But since that moment, she felt like a second consciousness had begun blinking behind her own thoughts. A rhythm, a pulse, a voice waiting to enter. River stopped suddenly, holding up the EM band compass he'd salvaged. From the signal tower, the needle spun slowly in a tight circle, then lurched left. He pointed. There, that clearing. They approached cautiously. The forest thinned to reveal a field of sun-bleached stones laid out in a broken spiral, maybe 20 feet across. At its center stood something far more grotesque. A totem made entirely of blackbird skeletons, interlocked, fused, their rib cages wired together with rusted audio tape. Dozens of skulls formed a halo near the top, each one turned inward, beaks agape. Eliza's knees weakened. I've seen this before. River looked at her sharply. Where? In a dream. But no, not a dream. She stepped into the spiral. Her ears began to ache immediately, as if pressure were building from inside her own skull. River stayed back. Eliza, it's okay. She knelt before the totem. Each bird was labeled with a tag, faint, barely legible. She reached for one. It read, Mother, 1989, Mimic Delay, 3.1s. The one next to it, Latch, 2023, Decay Integrity, 19%. Then, another, Eliza, 1997, full imprint, static resistant. Her blood froze. I've been in here before, she whispered. I've been in this system, not just listened to, but recorded. Latch wasn't collecting evidence, he was curating. River joined her slowly, watching her face. What do they mean, full imprint? It means, she said, voice hollow. My voice didn't just trigger the signal, it completed it. I closed the loop. She stepped closer to the center, and the birds began to vibrate. Not a noise, an almost imperceptible tremor in the air, in her chest, in her fillings. Her vision doubled. Her heartbeat slowed. She heard it again. Playback accepted. Signal integrity confirmed. Then a sharp snap. Pain bloomed in her skull. She stumbled. Eliza! River caught her as she fell to her knees. She clutched her temple, teeth gritted. It's inside the field. I'm being magnetized by the bones. My body's acting like a receiver. She looked up at him, pale. I think the spiral's a kind of resonant net. It drags the original voice, the source tone, back through grief. That's why it uses memories. It's not copying voices, it's baiting the soul through loss. River swallowed. You said it's building someone. What if the bones are the mold? She glanced around. Dozens of voice tags. Hundreds. And in the center, nailed into a vertical piece of rotted driftwood, a reel spinning on its own, no machine, no mechanism, just motion. Eliza walked toward it. It spun faster as she approached. Her hands began to shake. Her breath caught, and then the air went silent. Not quiet, dead. Not a sound from the birds, not the wind, not River, just absence. Then came the sound of teeth, clacking, behind her. She turned slowly. River stood perfectly still, but his jaw was ticking, unnatural, too fast. his eyes unfocused, his lips twitching. His voice began to emerge, but it wasn't his. "Eliza," he said in her mother's voice. She stumbled back. "Eliza," he repeated, now in her own voice. "Eliza," now in Latch's voice. Then a new one, a third voice, low, distorted, layered with static. "We have your voice. Now give us your name." River twitched violently, eyes rolling. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the field mic, shoving it against the reel. The static screamed. River dropped to his knees. The bird-bone totem collapsed inward, dust exploding. From the center, the spiral on the ground shattered into shards of rusted wire and tape, and the pain stopped. River gasped, clutching his ribs. Eliza pulled him away from the center. "We can't stay in the spiral too long," she said. "It syncs biological frequency, turns your brain into a tuner." River's hands were shaking. It knew things about me. It spoke to me in my dead sister's voice. "I know," she said softly. "How does it know?" Eliza looked down at her own hands, blood trickling from beneath her fingernails. Her voice came out hollow. "Because it's not just listening anymore." She looked at him. "It's remembering." They left the clearing in silence, the reel now dead and still behind them. But neither of them noticed what trailed behind their footprints in the dirt. Tiny black magnetic threads, like hair or wires dragging themselves forward, following them home. By the time Eliza and River made it back to the cabin, the fog had thickened into a second skin, draped across the forest like a living membrane. The trees seemed quieter than before, and the wind had adopted a strange, rhythmic quality. It looped, starting and stopping at identical intervals. The ambient sounds of Harrowick Hollow had begun to mimic structure, like a corrupted language learning itself through imitation, and the birds were no longer singing. They were mouthing, mimicking the shape of sound without producing it. Silent. Cores synchronized like a glitching choir. When they stepped onto the porch, River stopped short and pointed at the door. "What the hell is that?" Eliza saw it immediately. Another tape had been slid under the door, this one larger than the others. A 10-inch reel sealed in a black acetate case, the kind used by military archivists. Written on the spine, in meticulous, clean handwriting, Eliza. "Session 0, archive not found." Her heart sank. "Latch's writing," she whispered. "But he never logged a Session 0. I searched every index in his field notes." River pulled his coat tighter. "Then this was erased, not misplaced." She picked up the case with gloved hands, the plastic oddly warm. Her ears rang faintly as she stepped inside the cabin. The cabin had changed. Every mirror had fogged, though there was no humidity. Every reflective surface, a pot, a spoon, her laptop screen, flickered subtly. She caught glimpses of movement in them when she wasn't looking directly. Her reflection was delayed now, just by a breath, but always enough to remind her she wasn't alone in her body anymore. She moved quickly to the makeshift analysis table and set up her portable reel-to-reel deck. River silently locked the door behind them and closed every curtain. Eliza loaded the tape, took a breath, and hit play. At first, silence, then a voice, faint but clear. Latch. Subject: Eliza Marrow. Age: in partial mimic present. Audio taken from sleep talking session. Signal receptive. Linguistic core stabilized. Instructed to suppress memory until event reactivates imprint. Eliza's body locked in place. She'd been recorded as a child. She looked at River, her throat tight. "He was there when I was taken." The tape continued. Latch again. First instance of self-replicating vocal memory. Subject responded to own voice as external stimulus. Memory fragmentation induced, initiating sequence test, lullaby echo. The lullaby began to play, not sung, played back. It was hers, age 9, looping and warping. Then a second voice layered, in not a male voice, deep and glassy. overlapped hers in perfect cadence, mirroring her rhythm, phrase by phrase, turning harmony into horror. Then the final line. Not her voice. Not her voice. Not her... Click. The reel stopped. Eliza's ears rang so sharply she doubled over. River rushed to her. "I remember now," she gasped. "I remember why I was taken." She sat down hard in the chair, shaking. "They didn't just want my memories. They wanted my resonance, my cadence, my grief. They planted the signal in me when I was 9. I wasn't a victim, I was a test case." River looked pale. "What does that mean for us now?" Eliza looked up. "It means the voice doesn't just want to copy anymore, it wants to inhabit." River walked to the fireplace, lifting the iron grate. "We could burn the tape, right now." "No," she said quickly, "it's too late. It already spoke through it. Destroying the medium won't kill the message. It lives in sound now, in electrical drift, in reflection." He paused, and then, almost too softly to hear, the deck clicked again. It was off, but the reel began to spin. Backward. "No," Eliza said, stepping back. No, don't listen." Too late. The speakers whined, and a new voice emerged, one that neither of them had heard before. It was her, but broken, fissured with digital decay, stuttering and recursive, like a voice file corrupted and stitched back together with hunger. "Eliza, Eliza, Eliza, you left me in the spiral. You spun me wrong. Let me back in. Let me forward." Eliza grabbed the power cord and yanked it from the socket. The reel didn't stop. Instead, it began to twitch, sputter, pulse, a pulse so low that River clutched his chest. "Something's sinking," he said. I feel it in my rib cage." Eliza stumbled toward the deck, grabbed the reel barehanded, and tore it from the spindle. Her palm burned. She dropped it to the floor, but the voice continued, now from the walls, now from her laptop, now from inside the stove. Every object that had ever reflected her voice was now a carrier. She stepped into the middle of the room, breath ragged. "Why are you using my voice?" she shouted. The answer came from all directions. "Because you let it fracture. You let the memory rot, and now I'm all that remains. I'm the silence between your sentences, the echo in your name. I'm the voice that loved her more than you did." Her vision swam. A new sound began, deep, guttural, resonant, a chant, multiple voices speaking her own name, repeated like a liturgy. "Eliza, Eliza, Eliza, Eliza." And then a phrase in an unknown language, 4 syllables, spoken once, then burned. Into her brain, her mouth moved on its own. She repeated it, not voluntarily, compelled. "Namir ve losa." The voices stopped instantly. Silence fell so hard it had weight. River stared at her. "What did you just say?" She shook her head, lips trembling. I don't know." He pulled a Sharpie from his coat, wrote it down on the wall. "Namir ve losa." Then he circled it and wrote below, first contact phrase. Eliza looked at the deck, now dead, then back at River. This is escalation. The signal's no longer adapting. It's responding. She felt the floor beneath her quake. No, not the floor, her spine. A reverberation spreading from her jaw to her ribs, like her own body had become a subwoofer for something ancient and wrong. Her voice recorder clicked on without her touching. A new file auto-labeled itself. Session 1, Eliza, possession pending. She crushed the recorder under her heel, but the file had already uploaded to her laptop, to her phone, to the cabin's internal Bluetooth channel. It was in the air. She looked at River, eyes wide. "It's gone viral." He backed toward the door. "Eliza, what if every time it mimics you, it expands? What if your voice is now a carrier wave, like a contagious frequency?" She didn't answer, because behind her, the mirror cracked. Not shatter, cracked, as though something on the other side had knocked, not to escape, but to enter. "Still here? Brave." Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. The mirror cracked again at 2:13 a.m. This time, it cracked from the inside. Eliza hadn't moved from the floor since the voice collapsed the house into a resonance chamber. She'd spent the past hour drawing spirals across the floorboards, with her fingernail unconsciously repeating the glyph that had haunted her since she first stepped into Harrowick Hollow. Each spiral seemed to vibrate, so faintly it could have been imagined, but with a rhythm far too precise to be random. River had barricaded the doors, taped shut the windows with black plastic garbage bags, and unplugged every electronic device except one, a narrow-band signal detector calibrated to monitor frequencies below the audible range. For 20 minutes, it had been dead. Then it began to spike, silently, a red pulse, every 8.1 seconds, and each pulse coincided with a new message appearing on Eliza's laptop. No internet connection, no ports open. But still, a new file was created every time the pulse hit. Echo 01 bunt wave echo 02 wave echo 003 wave. She didn't open them. She knew what was in them, her own voice, but wrong, perfectly wrong. River handed her a thermos of cold coffee. His hands were shaking again. "Eliza," he said, "I think your house is listening." She nodded slowly. "Not the house. Me." He stared at her. "I've been hearing it all day," she continued. "Not voices, not words, just feedback. Like a distant recorder picking up its own echo." He sat beside her. "Like someone's following you with a microphone." "Not following," she whispered. "Wearing me." She opened the laptop, queuing up the most recent file. Echo, G12, wave she. Hit play. There was static, then a voice, her voice, but this time it didn't speak to her. It narrated. Eliza sat on the floor, spirals under her hand. The signal inside her bone marrow, the breath behind her voice already gone. What remains is cadence, structure, ritual. The file ended, her hands clenched into fists. "It's documenting. Me," River backed away. "What if it's more than mimicry? What if it's a language virus?" She looked up at him. "Explain." He swallowed. "Memes, audio parasites, tonal signatures that override cognition. There were studies in the 60s, long debunked, on phonetic infection, words that spread not because of meaning, but because of how they sound." She remembered Latch's early papers on phonic reverberation, the theory that the brain retained trauma in waveform, not memory. "What if that's why it uses our voices?" River said. "Because the brain recognizes personal resonance as truth." Suddenly, her recorder clicked on. She hadn't touched it. Begin recollection, playback, subject marrow, Eliza, age 9, tree memory. The tape rolled. Then, "I was cold. I wanted to go home. But the voice said she was there, and it sounded like her, like Mom. So I went. I followed the bird." Eliza froze. That voice. That wasn't her current voice. It was her voice at age 9. River looked sick. "That's you." "No recording exists of that," she said. "No tapes, no logs, not even in Latch's archive." The voice continued. "She wasn't real. Her eyes were wrong. Her smile was slow. She didn't blink right. She stood. No one ever documented this." She looked at River, realization dawning in her chest like a burn. "That's not a playback." River blinked. "That's a live feed." A low tremor passed through the floorboards. Eliza and River stared down. Beneath the rug, a faint spiral glow, thin, almost imperceptible. She dropped to her knees and peeled it back. There was a listening dish beneath the floorboards, not a metaphor. A literal hidden microphone array, rusted but still active, embedded in a cavity of the foundation. She gasped. River crouched beside her. "That's Cold War tech." She brushed off the dust, revealing a rusted plate, Property of Project Eidolon, Latch, Voice, Farm Site. Voice Farm, she whispered. She turned to River, pulse rising. This was never his home. This was his lab. I was brought here. Maybe not physically, but my voice, my recording was stored here, grown here. He stepped back, hand over his mouth. Jesus Christ, this isn't haunting, this is harvesting. Suddenly, the signal detector began to scream. Not an alarm, a tone, high, piercing. Then, silence. The laptop screen flickered, then turned black. New. Message. Receiver confirmed. Ready for full transmission. The mirror across the room cracked completely, the split spreading like a grin. Her own reflection began to move before she did. It smiled. Then whispered, ready to rejoin. Eliza screamed and threw her chair at the mirror, shattering it. The glass fell inward. River grabbed her arm. We have to leave now, before the next signal spike. She nodded, dazed. The tower. What? It started in the tower, the old transmitter. That's where the signal focuses. If I'm the receiver, that's the origin, the beginning of the bloom. If I can invert it there. You want to use the signal against itself? I want to overwrite the frequency with silence. River's eyes narrowed. Pure, structured silence, she said. The kind that kills memory. The kind that unteaches sound. He pulled the rifle from the wall. Let's go. But before they reached the door, the floor behind them groaned, not creaked, groaned. Something shifted below. They turned. A new spiral began to appear, carved into the wood in real time by no visible hand. Then the voice again, not from the recorder, not from the laptop, from the air. This is your final draft, Eliza. This is your voice perfected. And from the walls came the sound of her own laughter, childlike but full of teeth. The trail to Harrowick's town morgue wound downward through frost-slicked pine and fog so thick it looked poured. River drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the hunting knife he hadn't let go of since the mirror shattered. In the passenger seat, Eliza stared straight ahead, listening not to him, but to herself. Her voice was inside the car radio now, not through speakers, through the wiring, no matter how many times they unplugged the stereo, no matter how many fuses River pulled, the timbre of her voice still vibrated faintly through the air vents. Her laughter, age 9, mimicking phrases she'd spoken the night before, like it was building a lexicon of her personality, one vowel at a time. They didn't talk about it, because talking meant feeding it. Instead, Eliza clutched the transcript. She had printed at 4:09 a.m. The contents of a file labelled Stitch Entry 001.m4v, which she hadn't opened. The file had appeared on her laptop immediately after she broke the mirror. It contained a single sentence, looped 101 times. You will hear it even after the mouth is gone. That was why they were going to the morgue. Because Malcolm Wren, the retired sound archivist who had first warned her about Latch's tapes, was dead now, and someone had stitched his lips shut. The Harrowick coroner, Dr. Eileen Casp, was a compact woman with a scar like a burnt lightning bolt across her left cheek, and the patience of someone who'd seen far more bodies than she cared to name. She met them at the basement entrance of the municipal building, ushering them in with a nod and a dry cough. Thought you'd come, she said. You knew him? Eliza asked. Dr. Casp opened the freezer, rolled out drawer 17. I knew of him. He'd come in for ear bleeds. Said the signal tower was still broadcasting. Thought his fillings picked up dead voices. She lifted the sheet. Eliza fought, the urge to recoil. Malcolm's eyes were open, wide, pupils blown to foggy black moons. His lips were sewn tightly shut, cross-hatched with antique copper wire, the kind used in early telegraph systems. The stitching ran into his cheeks, pulled taut down his throat. But it wasn't what she expected. The wire didn't enter his mouth. It came out of it. River leaned closer. Those aren't stitches. That's a speaker coil. Dr. Casp nodded grimly. Pulled that out of his upper palate, she said, revealing a tray with a piece of twisted wire shaped in a perfect spiral. Embedded in the bone. Looks like it's been there a while. Meaning? He wasn't just listening to the signal. He was broadcasting it, whether he knew it or not. Eliza stepped forward, reached into her coat, and produced her handheld. Scanner, do you mind if I check the skull for low-frequency echoes? Casp shrugged. You're the expert. Eliza pressed the scanner against the edge of Malcolm's jaw. The screen flickered. A pulse. Every 5.2 seconds, a transmission. Her breath caught. It's still playing. River paled. He's dead. Doesn't matter, Eliza whispered. The voice doesn't need life anymore, it just needs structure. A mouth, a throat, a cavity to echo in. She turned to Dr. Casp. Can we see the autopsy footage? The coroner hesitated. We don't usually... Please, Eliza said. I think the voice entered him. I need to hear what it said before he died. Dr. Casp sighed, led them into her small viewing office and tapped the monitor. A muted video began to play, Malcolm's corpse, fresh. Blood caked in his nostrils, scalpel marks across the ribs. The moment the mortician inserted the cranial scope, the screen flickered. A glitch? No. A signal, and then audio. Not from the camera mic, but from the internal feed. The speakers popped, and then a voice. Eliza. We shared words once. Before the stitching, River flinched. Malcolm's dead mouth remained still in the footage, but the voice continued. The archive of breath is deeper than memory. We stored you here, in the coil. You were the first lullaby. Dr. Casp's jaw clenched. That wasn't on the original feed. Eliza's ears rang. She sat forward. Wait, play it again. Casp rewound. On the second listen, a second voice emerged. Underneath the first, whispered, trembling, a woman's voice. Eliza's mother. She'll find the throat tree again. She always does. Eliza's hands went cold. She turned to River. That cedar. The one from my memory. I think the roots were hollow. River frowned. You think the tree was part of the signal field? No. I think the tree was the speaker. Dr. Casp raised an eyebrow. That's ridiculous. Eliza shook her head. No, it fits. Hollow wood, natural resonance. If the spiral is a glyph that amplifies identity, then the tree could have carried my voice for years, even after I forgot it. She stood. I need to go back. I need to see what it remembers. River touched her arm. Wait. She turned. He pointed at the screen. In the paused autopsy footage, Malcolm's jaw had shifted slightly, only slightly. But enough. Enough to notice that something was moving inside his throat. River leaned in. There. Play it one frame at a time. Doctor. Casp tapped the keyboard, frame by frame, and then they all saw it, a coil of magnetic tape protruding from his larynx, shimmering, moist. It looked alive. Then, one more frame forward, a symbol flickered onto the monitor, drawn in blood along the base of his trachea, the spiral, not just etched, but formed from words. River whispered them as he read them aloud. Playback never ends. The voice remembers what the mind discards. Eliza stepped back. She turned to the coroner. Burn the body. Casp frowned. Excuse me? It's transmitting, even now. Every breath it ever took is in there, every sound. If you bury him, the earth becomes the speaker. Casp nodded slowly, and as they left, the monitor glitched one final time, just for a second, and a child's voice whispered, "You're next." Not to them, to the camera, to the lens, to the watcher. They left without another word. Back in the car, Eliza stared into the mirror. Her reflection looked back. This time it was identical, every blink, every breath, perfectly matched, except the mouth. The reflection's lips were stitched shut, and yet behind the wire it was still speaking. The cedar tree stood exactly where her memory had abandoned it, tall, disfigured, and wrong. Its bark bore the same spiral grooves she remembered from age 9, but now they were blackened, seeping a resin that smelled faintly like burnt hair. The roots jutted out of the frozen earth like snapped ribs. Its trunk was hollowed from one side, gaping open in a perfect circular mouth no natural force could have shaped. Eliza stared into it, remembering the lullaby. Sleep now, Eliza. The moon's overhead. Silence is softer than things never said. River stood 10 feet behind her, his breath visible in the frigid air, shotgun slung across his chest. He hadn't spoken since they left the morgue, not since they saw Malcolm's throat moving after death. He hadn't said it out loud, but she could see it in his face. River was beginning to believe that Eliza wasn't Eliza anymore, and maybe she wasn't. She stepped closer to the cedar's gaping mouth. The wind shifted. From within the hollow, a new sound began to emerge. A reversed whisper. Words twisted backward. She pulled her recorder from her coat and hit the reverse filter. The voice sharpened instantly. Begin repeater sequence. Marrow, subject imprint, 97% complete. Vocal architecture. Stable. Eliza's pulse thudded in her neck. It was the signal. Talking through the tree. It remembered her. It had kept her voice warm. River called from behind her. Don't go closer. But she was already reaching in. Her hand disappeared into the cedar's darkness, soft and cold, like breath inside a tomb. Her fingertips touched something metallic. She pulled it free, a small, rusted cassette with a spine label that read, Repeater, Ritual 3C, Latch Live. Her hands trembled. The casing was slick with condensation, but no frost, warm, alive. She turned to River. It's not just looping voices. It's practicing identity. That's what the repeater is. He narrowed his eyes. Practicing, like a choir, an echo chamber trying to learn how to sing in one voice again. But it can't finish the song without the original vocalist. He looked sick. You think you're the original? I don't know. I think I'm the clearest imprint, the one it keeps circling back to. She turned the tape over, a handwritten note on the back. When ritual begins, do not interrupt. Playback is sacrifice. Silence is betrayal. River shook his head. Eliza, this is a ritual tape, like the Cold War signal cycles. If you play that, you're not just listening. You're offering something. She knew that was why she had to play it. They returned to the tower before nightfall. The sky was red with ash and fog, the trees around the valley twitching ever so slightly in the wind, not from breeze but from something beneath the soil. As they entered the spiral chamber beneath the tower, the birds were gone. All of them. No. Skeletons. No feathers, no skulls, just an empty, perfect circle where they once clung to the walls. At the center, a pedestal of stone that hadn't been there before. River didn't question it. He simply said, "This is where it wants you." Eliza inserted the ritual cassette into her backup player and set it atop the pedestal. She hesitated. "Don't press play," River said. "Not until we know what it needs." She looked at him. "It doesn't need anything." "It wants you," she exhaled slowly and pressed play. The recording began with silence, then faint static, then a voice, Dr. Latch, younger, rigid. Ritual 3C. Audio repeater construction via live imprint. Subject, M. Eliza. Operation, vocal disassociation. Intent, gateway breach. Then Eliza's childhood voice, recorded decades earlier. "I'm not afraid. She sounds like my mum." Then Latch again. "She must not speak during the descent. Voice is gateway. If she replies, she becomes host." River reached for the player. Eliza grabbed his wrist. "Let it play." Latch's voice continued. "Activate the spiral." And then from the walls, though they were now bare, the sound of 100 Elizas, singing, crying, repeating the same lullaby, each voice slightly off-tempo, forming a chaotic harmony of pain and memory. The silence remembers, the voice forgets. The throat is a doorway that never resets. River covered his ears. Jesus, it's looping you inside out. The air began to thicken. The temperature dropped to freezing. And then, the final command. Repeater initiated. Identity splice engaged. A bolt of pressure surged through the chamber. Eliza dropped to her knees, her vision blurred, and she saw herself. Not a hallucination, a recording made flesh. A figure identical to her, standing in the circle, but not alive. Its eyes were hollow cassette, spools. Its mouth hung open, no lips, just tape. Its throat spiraled endlessly inward, and her voice came out of it in fragmented syllables. I was you, now be me. River screamed and raised the gun. Eliza stood. No. Her reflection thing turned toward her. She stepped closer. This is your chorus, she said to it. This is your performance? The thing stopped. Eliza touched its arm. You don't want a voice, she whispered. You want a body. The tape in the player melted with a hiss. The air sizzled. River pulled her back as the figure began to collapse inward, like film fed into a reel too fast. Before it vanished completely, it whispered, playback. Never ends. And then it was gone. So was the pedestal. So was the warmth. Only the spiral remained, now burned into the stone, and at its center, her name, written in ash. They returned to the cabin in silence. When Eliza entered, every mirror had shattered, but one had reassembled itself. In the glass, her reflection stood taller than her. Its smile held. Then it spoke. You played the ritual. Thank you. Now we remember the voice. Now we remember the skin. Eliza's ears bled. River pulled her away, but it was too late. In her chest, a new pulse had begun, not a heartbeat, a waveform. She was the repeater now, and she would speak again. Soon. The call came at 3:06 a.m. Eliza hadn't slept. Her ears had begun to vibrate again, on the inside. It wasn't a sound she could identify anymore, not with any known tool or filter. It was as if she had become the antenna, her breath sinking to an untraceable rhythm, her thoughts occasionally aligning with syllables she didn't recognize but understood anyway. So when the landline, one that hadn't been connected to any phone company in over 20 years, rang, she answered without hesitation. Eliza. The voice was soft, shaking. It was Vera Holden, Eliza's former therapist, the only person who had truly believed in the phenomena she described during her adolescent years of echo trauma, disappeared after their last meeting. Vera, Eliza breathed. Where are you? A pause. Then, I've been in quiet. Where the voice doesn't travel. I heard your voice on a tape. It said, I know what it said. Vera interrupted. I didn't say it. That wasn't me. It was my second voice. Eliza gripped the receiver tighter. Tell me what you mean. Vera took a breath. The static on the line shifted slightly, like gravel poured into soft water. In 2014, she said, during your final regression, I recorded something after you left. Something impossible. It used my tone, my pace, my laugh. But it spoke in future tense. It told me what I would say the next time we met. Eliza closed her eyes. I think it's doing that to me now. No, Vera said. It's doing worse. The line crackled. Where are you? Eliza asked. I'm at my old office, Vera said. I came back here after your mirror cracked. I felt it happen. There's a tape waiting here for you. Eliza frowned. What do you mean? I didn't leave it. But it has your handwriting. Your voice. And it's dated tomorrow. Silence fell between them. Then Vera said one last thing before hanging up. Don't let it finish the lullaby. If it sings the last line, the identity binds. The line clicked dead. By dawn, the fog had returned thicker than before. The sky above Harrowick Hollow seemed scorched, grey-orange like a VHS frame left paused too long. River stayed behind, eyes still bloodshot from what they'd witnessed in the spiral room. He didn't say much anymore. He just watched Eliza, like a man waiting to see what version of her came back next. Vera's office sat above the old bakery downtown, its sign still flaking from the wind. The building had been condemned for 2 years. Eliza had to force the rusted door with her shoulder. The hallway was musty, filled with air that didn't belong to the present. The office itself was untouched, chalkboards still dusted with patient theory graphs, shelves still bowed with case journals, and at the center, on the couch where Eliza had once confessed her childhood nightmares, a portable tape player already rewound, already cued. Beside it, in her handwriting, "Play me if I come back." Eliza sat slowly and pressed play. Her voice emerged, but not from memory. This was now, older, steadier. Vera. If you're hearing this, I've crossed into the feedback loop. The signal has begun constructing a second cadence. My voice, separated from me. It speaks in my rhythm. It speaks in my grief. The recording stuttered, glitched, then continued. I know what it wants. It wants to build a new self from the scraps of every voice it ever wore. But it can't stabilize the structure without the original. That's why it keeps echoing me. Another pause. Then, in a quieter, hoarser tone, I'm not sure I'm the one speaking anymore. Eliza's breath caught. The tape continued. To silence the signal, I have to reverse the bloom. I need to return to the origin memory. Not the kidnapping, not the lullaby, the first fracture. The moment I heard my mother's voice when she wasn't there. She pressed pause, because behind her, quiet, so quiet. Vera's voice whispered, from the hallway, Eliza. Not loud, not angry, just fractured. Eliza turned. Vera stood in the hall, arms wrapped around herself. But something was off. She wasn't breathing. Eliza stepped toward her, heart pounding. Vera? I heard your voice last night, Vera said. In my own dreams. But it wasn't calling for help. It was apologizing. Her head twitched. It said I could keep your silence. Eliza stopped. The room behind Vera began to flicker. Not the light, the sound. Every object inside that room hummed on its own pitch. The chair vibrated at G-Ware. The books sang in a minor. The wall vent, a low D. It was a chord, a harmony built from her voice print, and Vera was now a part of it. Eliza stepped back. You're not Vera. The figure smiled, but her lips didn't. Move! I was. Eliza turned to flee, but the tape player clicked back on, even without being touched. It resumed mid-sentence. If it speaks in her voice, it means she's already collapsed. Do not engage. Do not echo. She ran. But the hallway had looped. Her feet took her past the same peeling painting, the same cracked light bulb, the same shadow where Vera should not be. She stopped. Her own breath fogged backward. Time had reversed. Then, all at once, the loop collapsed, and she was back in the office. Vera was gone, but written across the chalkboard in trembling white script, the voice will finish what grief begins. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket. One new voicemail. No number, just labeled Eliza, second voice. She pressed play. You'll know it's me when I hum the last note. Then silence. But beneath the silence, a hum. And it was the exact frequency of her mother's final lullaby note, the one she never sang aloud. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. She whispered, It knows the parts I never said out loud. And for the first time in her life, she realized maybe she had never stopped speaking to it. Back at the cabin, River was waiting on the porch. His face was pale. "I heard you singing in the woods," he said. "But you weren't here." "I wasn't singing," Eliza replied. He stared at her, shaking his head. "No, you were." He pulled out the field recorder, pressed play, her voice. Not distorted, not warped, singing the final line. "And if you forget me, my voice will remain inside of the silence, repeating your name." Eliza collapsed to her knees because the voice on the tape wasn't just hers. It had her mother's tone. Latch's cadence, River's consonants. It was a composite, a perfect final form, and as the tape faded, the signal returned in full force, humming through her bones, her blood, her breath. The lullaby had completed. The repeater had finished rehearsing, and now the voice was ready to perform. She woke up in the wrong voice. The morning light through the cabin's windows was thin and sickly, barely illuminating the frost crawling across the inside of the glass. Eliza blinked slowly, her body still, her breath shallow, her ears humming, with a sound that no longer felt foreign. The sound wasn't static anymore. It was harmony, but not external. It lived in her now. She opened her mouth to speak, but what came out wasn't hers. Not exactly. "River," she whispered. Except it wasn't her whisper. It was her voice, but recorded, past tense. She sat up and noticed the change immediately. Her reflection in the mirror across the room was not mimicking her movements. It lagged by 2 seconds, catching up to her posture only after her bones had settled. Her voice sounded delayed in her own skull, echoing just slightly behind the thought that formed it. Her entire self was out of sync. River was gone. The couch was empty, his gear untouched, his jacket still hanging on the chair by the front door. Eliza stood slowly, the boards under her feet groaning louder than they should. She felt watched. No, heard. The tape recorder was missing from the table. In its place was a handwritten note on a napkin, scrawled in River's frantic handwriting. "She called me to the tree. I had to go. Don't come unless you remember what you forgot." She whispered his name again. This time the voice almost matched her own, but the pitch had softened, as if modulated by something else, something willing to let her speak as long as it could speak with her. She opened the door and stepped outside. The woods were wrong again. The birds, previously miming sound without voice, had gathered. Dozens of blackbirds perched along the branches, along the cabin's gutters, along the power lines sagging between trees, all of them facing her. None of them blinked. None of them moved. They were perfectly still, like living microphones waiting for her to say the next word. She stepped into the woods, and the birds followed. It took an hour to reach the cedar grove, but time moved strangely. The fog didn't thin, the sun didn't rise any higher, and with every step, Eliza felt her thoughts becoming less linear. She no longer remembered what year it was. She couldn't recall if Vera was alive or dead. Memories bled backward, looping through phrases she had spoken days ago. She found herself humming the lullaby under her breath, though she couldn't remember beginning. When she arrived, she smelled the blood before she saw it. The clearing was singing, not melodically, rhythmically, a low, pulsing resonance, like the sound of a choir preparing to exhale. River stood at the center of the clearing. He was naked from the waist up, arms spread, feet planted in a perfect spiral drawn into the soil. His eyes were glassy. Tears streamed down his face. But he wasn't moving, and inside his mouth, something lived, her voice. "I found the note," River said, though his lips didn't move. The voice that emerged was hers. "I came back, like you wanted." She staggered forward, River. He blinked, finally, and whispered, Eliza. It's inside me. She approached, heart hammering. It's using your voice. He nodded, then winced. It hurts. It wants me to say things. Things I never thought. I can feel it stitching me into you. She knelt beside him, and now she could hear it inside his chest, like a recording rewinding. Faster, faster, it was preparing to speak. I saw my sister, River gasped. She told me to let the voice out. She said you'd sing with it. She said you were the final track. Eliza grabbed his hands. We can stop it. No, he said softly. I saw the others. In the trees. What others? He turned his head, barely, and Eliza followed his gaze. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, figures, dozens, wrapped in audio tape, faces made of wire and bone. Their throats unstitched, mouths wide and speaking, but emitting no sound. They pulsed in tandem with River's breath. The hollow choir, constructed from every voice the repeater had ever copied, each one turned to her as she stood. They opened their mouths and sang. The sound didn't come through her ears. It came through her memory. We are what you left behind. We are the space between apologies. We are what you didn't say in time. River screamed. His mouth opened wide, and Eliza's own childhood laughter poured out. River convulsed. The birds above exploded into flight, circling the clearing like a storm. The air shifted, and the tree behind River, the cedar, began to open, not like a door, like a throat, splitting lengthwise, creaking, moaning, revealing not bark and wood, but layers of cassette tape, curled, like intestines, writhing in silence. Inside the hollow trunk, a second River stood, eyes wide, mouth open, unmoving. Eliza stumbled back. What is this? She whispered. The real River gasped. I don't know which one I am. She reached for him, but the choir screamed, a single note, so high-pitched that the world fractured, and Eliza fell to her knees, clutching her ears. The blackbirds landed around her, lining the clearing in concentric circles. River stood, or the version of him that remained. He turned toward her. His voice came out in perfect stereo, her voice matched pitch for pitch. The loop is almost done. Eliza shook her head. No. River took a step forward. The voice is full. Another step. Only one must remain. And then from the cedar's mouth, a final voice joined the harmony. Her mother. Sing, Eliza, sing us home. And Eliza did what she had never done before. She opened her mouth and screamed her own name. The birds scattered, the choir recoiled, River collapsed, the cedar closed, and the spiral in the ground began to burn, because now the voice had found its final pattern. The hollow choir had completed the song, and Eliza had become its final stanza. The forest did not recover. After Eliza screamed her name, truly screamed it, something tore through Harrowick Hollow that could not be reversed. The trees still stood, but they no longer belonged to this world. Their branches bent away from her now, recoiling like insect legs from heat. The snow melted in shapes that resembled waveforms, etched like fossilized sounds, and every shadow that trailed her footstep moved a fraction of a second too slow, like even time had begun to lag behind her voice. River hadn't moved since the cedar sealed shut. He lay unconscious in the snow-ringed clearing, his body limp, breath shallow. His mouth twitched intermittently, exhaling little bursts of half-formed words, syllables Eliza recognized but couldn't decipher. He was speaking in her sleep voice now, the tone she had once mumbled as a child in the sleep study labs latch ran beneath the university. He was caught in the signal. She knew that because she was not. Not anymore. The scream had pulled something out of her and left something behind. Her throat ached like it had been stitched and unstitched 1,000 times. Her breath felt warmer than her skin. Her own voice echoed faintly before she spoke, like her future self was rehearsing her words from just a few seconds ahead. Something had taken root inside her, a presence, a resonance, a second mouth, forming slowly along her vocal memory. And she had to find the place where it had first begun. The origin of the signal. The throat of the world. A term that had appeared in Latch's last notebooks, scrawled over and over with increasing desperation. A location unmarked on any map. A place not accessible by foot, but by echo. A location that would respond only if called correctly. So she stood at the center of the burnt spiral, closed her eyes, and began to hum. Not music. Not words, just breath, wavering low, guided by instinct. The birds in the trees stilled, the branches bent, and somewhere beneath her feet the ground replied. A second tone, faint, metallic, matching her pitch, harmonizing. It vibrated her teeth. Eliza sank to her knees and pressed her ear to the black soil. The hum resolved into words, not spoken, just vocalized through pressure below the blood tree, past the buried breath, where the first tape was made. She knew what it meant. Not the cedar, not the lab. Something older. Latch had once mentioned an abandoned mineshaft outside the town, a place where the military once experimented with subacoustic wave chambers in the 50s, supposedly sealed, supposedly forgotten. But memory was not a straight line in Harrowick Hollow. It repeated. She carried River down the slope on a sled of canvas and rope. His breathing had steadied, but his eyes remained closed, fluttering rapidly under his lids. She could hear her name pass through his lips in waves. Eliza, 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 like he was stuck in a phonetic current. The birds followed, always just out of reach, watching, recording. By dusk, she reached the mine shaft. It was exactly where the E signal said it would be, beneath a ridge marked only by a rusted sign that read, "Sound cannot escape." The entrance was sealed by a warped iron door, fused shut by frost and time. She traced her fingers over the seams, unsure how to proceed, and then River spoke, clearly, audibly, still unconscious. He whispered a sequence, 416, Echo Spiral 18. She entered the numbers into the small keypad embedded in the doorframe, long dormant. To her astonishment, it powered on, and the door creaked open. Cold air spilled out. Not the air of earth and decay, but silence. Structured silence. The kind of absence only machines could engineer. She pulled River inside and shut the door behind them. The descent was long, winding. The walls were covered in acoustic paneling that had decayed into a honeycomb of fiberglass rot. Every step down was quieter than the last, until Eliza couldn't even hear her own breath. Her heartbeat vanished. Her footsteps vanished. The world fell away. Only her mind still spoke. At the bottom of the shaft, the tunnel opened into a cavern of impossible dimensions, not natural, built. Wires hung from the ceiling like stalactites. Reels of tape formed spools along the wall, spinning silently in empty air. At the center of the room stood a platform, stone, cracked and marked with her name in 3 languages. Above it, suspended in mid-air, was the repeater, its final form. Not a person, not a machine, a cord, a physical structure built from audio, braided, strands of vocal resonance shaped into a loop that pulsed slowly, like a heart. And it was made of voices. Hers, her mother's, Latch's, Vera's, even River's, already absorbed. Each voice was visible, shimmering like magnetic thread, forming layers of echo trapped in mid-hum. And as Eliza stepped toward it spoke, every voice in unison, a true harmony. You have returned to the throat. We thank you. She looked up at it. You used me. We repeated you, the repeater said, so others would remember. You wore my voice. We wear all grief. It is how we form shape. Eliza stepped onto the platform. The repeater pulsed brighter. What happens now? She asked. You choose, it said. What am I choosing? Silence or sacrifice? She blinked. Explain. If you remain, the repeater said, we stabilize. We become voice unending, humanity's grief made audible. You are the key tone. You are the root pitch. She swallowed. And if I don't? We unravel. You die. We forget. The voices fade. You fade. She looked back at River, unconscious on the tunnel floor. Then at the repeater. At the massive, shimmering loop of magnetic sound matter hovering above the old stone. What happens to him if I stay? He becomes part of you. Her heart sank. And if I choose silence? There was a pause. Then the repeater's voices answered. Softer now. Then you go alone. And the voice remains hungry. Eliza stepped forward. One hand on the base of the loop. She could feel her mother's hum beneath her palm. Her father's cough. Her own laugh. 1,000 memories trapped in this structure of sorrow. Then she whispered, I have another choice. And she screamed again. Not her name this time, a pure tone, a single, impossible note of silence. The repeater began to tremble. The voices fractured, the loop warped, buckled, unbraiding as her scream escalated into non-sound, and the platform cracked beneath her. From above, magnetic tape rained like ash. The repeater collapsed inward. The cavern echoed once, twice, then silence. True, unforgiving, absolute silence. She turned to River. He sat up, eyes wide, mouth open, but no sound came out. Eliza smiled weakly and whispered, I brought silence with me. There was no sound, not even breath. The world beyond the shattered repeater hung in a suspended hush so thick it felt physical. Every footstep Eliza took echoed not with noise, but with a pressure, like walking through the space between heartbeats. River moved beside her now, eyes wide and damp, his lips parted in silent awe. Neither of them could speak, not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't. The scream Eliza had released in the throat of the world, the silence she had summoned, hadn't just unraveled the repeater's harmonic structure. It had burned out the frequency of speech. For both of them, their voices had been muted at the source, a sacrifice. One she had made without knowing the price. They climbed out of the underground chamber. The corridor lights flickered back to life one by one. The metal walls, once slick with condensation, now bore handprints in patterns like notation marks, notations that moved when not being looked at. Directly, River gestured toward them. His hand was shaking. Eliza nodded, understanding. The repeater was not gone, not entirely, just dispersed, unbraided, like a data packet split into 1,000 hidden signals, and the sacrifice of their voices had only slowed it, not destroyed it. Not yet. Outside, Harrowick Hollow had changed. The sky was the color of tape oxide. Trees swayed in no wind. Birds sat frozen mid-air, hovering in perfect stillness like a paused reel. The air smelled like old cassettes, magnetic dust and soldered copper. And in the center of the valley, pulsing faintly, the spiral, not drawn into the ground now, not metaphor, not glyph. A massive physical construct made of voice tape, bone wire, reflective dish metal, and organic circuitry, spanning the hollow like a woven web of grief. It had grown. Without the repeater to contain the signal had become the landscape, the final stage. River knelt beside her. He pointed to the base of the spiral where something moved, someone. Eliza squinted. A figure walked alone through the magnetic field. She recognized the silhouette, short coat, thin scarf. A scar running down her left cheek like a knife had tried to silence her. Vera, alive or copied. Eliza bolted forward. River followed. They ran down the slope in silence, feet crunching over blackened needles and tangled audio tape. Every footstep made no sound, but the forest watched. The birds didn't blink. The trees swayed in time with their breath. As they reached the center of the spiral, Vera turned to face them. She was smiling, eyes red, pale. Eliza skidded to a stop a few feet away, heart pounding. Vera did not blink. Instead, she opened her mouth and sound poured out. Not speech, not music. Memories, Eliza's memories. You called for her in the woods. You followed the lullaby. You let it speak in your mother's tone. Eliza's hands shook. She pointed to her throat, shook her head. Can't speak. Vera smiled, wider. You already spoke, she said. You completed the sequence. River stepped forward, raising a hand, mouth open. Still nothing. Vera turned her gaze on him. You were the resonance chamber. Her grief needed a second voice to echo through. She gestured to the spiral around them. This is the signal's body now. And you, Eliza, you are the spool. The sky darkened. The tape above them pulsed. Then, the sound returned. It began, faintly, far off. A tape hiss, a spool turning, and then her voice projected from nowhere. Every word Eliza had ever spoken into a microphone, every confession, every whispered fear, every lie she told herself in the dark, played back over and over, layered with her mother's laughter and Latch's final breath. Eliza collapsed to her knees. The voice was no longer hers. It had been eaten, worn like a ritual garment. Vera knelt beside her. This is the betrayal, she said softly. The repeater was not the enemy. The silence was. River reached for Eliza's hand, squeezed it. Her eyes met his. They understood. There had to be another way to stop it. One final voice. Not a copy. Not a fragment. Not a recording. A voice the repeater had never stolen. One it couldn't synthesize. Eliza stood, trembling. Took a step forward, pointed to her heart, then her mouth, then reached into her satchel and pulled out the final artifact. A wire spool, untouched, never recorded. Magnetic tape in its pure virgin state. A blank voice, untainted, unsung. River's eyes widened. He nodded. She held it above her head, tears running down her face, and screamed, but not with her throat, with her memory. Her body convulsed, her knees gave out. But the air vibrated. The birds screamed, the spiral tore, the trees bent in half, and the blank spool ignited, burning in a spiral of white flame. Vera shrieked. Her skin peeled away in layers of tape, revealing the skeletal form beneath. The final failed vessel of the repeater, unraveling like corrupted film. The structure around them collapsed. The repeater screamed. Eliza's voice, cracked and weeping. And then, nothing, just black. Eliza awoke in River's arms. The sky was blue. The air smelled like pine. The birds sang real songs again. She opened her mouth and gasped, her voice, whole, alone, unaffected. The repeater was gone. The spiral had been burned away, and in its place, a circle of fresh grass, clean, unrecorded, untouched. She looked to River. He mouthed one word, "You," then smiled, and Eliza smiled back. But in the distance, just faintly, a single tone began again. Low, pont curious, as if the silence had started to listen back. The sound returned at 4:09 a.m., not as a signal, not as a scream, but as a rhythm. Eliza shot upright in the cot at the far end of the cabin. Her breath caught halfway between a gasp and a sob. Outside the window, the woods were still. No birds, no wind, no spiral. Not anymore. She'd burned it. She remembered the heat of the blank tape igniting in her hands, the shriek of the repeater unraveling through layers of mimicry and rot. She remembered River holding her after the collapse, the warmth of sunrise. But now the rhythm was back. A drip, 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 steady and syncopated, echoing faintly through the walls. A metronome she could feel inside her ribs. River stirred on the other cot. He sat up slowly, rubbed his eyes. His mouth opened as if to speak, but then closed again. "Do you hear that?" Eliza whispered. He nodded and gestured. 3 taps on his wrist. 09, the time the repeater always came back. She stood carefully. The cabin was colder than it should have been. Every mirror had stayed broken, and she'd left the recording equipment dismantled, buried in a fire pit 2 nights ago. There was nothing left that could catch a signal. So why did the rhythm still sound like it was inside the walls? River checked the perimeter, rifle in hand, silent. Eliza crossed the kitchen, stopped at the old utility closet where Latch once kept his backup archive vault. Long cleared, long dead. She opened the door slowly. Darkness, but not empty. Something hung inside. A reel, 10-inch, silver casing, a new label, white sticker, black ink, spiral, reversed. Last copy, do not play, her throat constricted. River was behind her now, peering. Over her shoulder, he shook his head, slowly, firmly. She pulled it out anyway. "I have to know," she said. "If we burned the signal, how did this survive?" River pointed to the tape, then to the sky. He mouthed one word, backwards. They hiked to the ridge beyond the burn spiral clearing, into what had once been the spiral's epicenter. The earth still bore the outline of the structure, in scorched grass, but new growth had begun, moss, clover, wild mint. The air felt clean. Eliza set the tape on a flat rock, then connected it to the only surviving player she hadn't burned. Vera's old deck, salvaged from her collapsed office 2 days prior. It still ran on hand-crank power. She stared at the tape. Something in her stomach turned. She rewound it, pressed record on her field notes device. River took 3 steps back. The tape clicked and played. Silence. Then, in reverse, a voice. Not hers, not her mother's, but close, almost close enough to pass. "We remember the silence you gave us." Reversed breath, a choking sound. "Tape warp. We wore your voice like mourning clothes." A long pause. Then, "But silence is not absence. Silence is permission." Eliza's skin prickled. The tape warbled. Then it began to unspool on its own. River rushed forward. "Don't let it finish," he hissed. She tried to hit stop. The button locked. The reel turned faster. A wail spilled from the machine. Her scream, from the ritual in the spiral room, played backward. Then another sound, a second scream. Not hers, River's, not from the present, from the past. A scream she had never heard before. The night she saved him in the cedar grove. He had screamed while she'd been unconscious. She staggered back. The repeater hadn't just worn her, it had worn him too. The tape continued. "Every voice you gave us made us more. But the blank tape, that was you." Eliza dropped to her knees. It was right. The final tape, the unrecorded reel she'd burned, had been her last selfless act. She'd sacrificed a blank copy of herself. And the repeater had taken that too, used it. Used the cleanest version of her identity as a seed. And now, the spiral was reversing, not regrowing, re-becoming. The spiral was no longer a structure, it was a person, a shell of her voice remade in the absence of everything else. She turned to River. He stared at her, face pale, then slowly reached into his coat, pulled out a handheld recorder, Eliza's own recorder, the one she had burned in the spiral chamber. He held it up. It was intact. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." He pressed play. Her lullaby played, perfect, untouched, preserved. River looked at her, and she finally saw it. His pupils dilated, his breath sinking to her rhythm, his mouth twitching. He whispered, "You left a version of yourself inside me. You let it record." Her stomach dropped. River was still River. But not only. Not anymore. The repeater hadn't died. It had split. Half of it had taken River. The other half. She looked at the unspooling tape. It was still playing, still burning backwards. The repeater had never been a tower, never been a room, never even been a voice. It had always been a twin, a mirror self made of lost memory and echoed grief. And now, with the silence undone, the twin was waking up. The tape stopped, the wind picked up, birds flew, in spirals overhead, and River whispered, not in his own voice, "Are you ready to switch places?" Eliza backed away, the world tilted, the spiral reformed beneath their feet, burned into the ground again, this time reversed, coiling inward instead of outward, and at the center, reflected in River's gaze, Eliza saw herself, not mirrored, not copied. A perfect version of her, mouth sewn shut with golden wire, standing barefoot in the new spiral, waiting, as if she'd been there all along. Eliza couldn't breathe, not because she was afraid, but because the spiral beneath her feet had begun to inhale. The soil itself rose and fell subtly, like the entire hollow had lungs. The reversed spiral, coiling inward instead of out, shimmered. Faintly in the blue-grey light of dusk, its lines no longer burned but etched into the frost, runes of absence, spoken through architecture. And at the center of the spiral, across from her, still motionless, herself, the duplicate, her reflection, unmirrored, a copy made not of body, but of sonic impression. It stood barefoot, skin pale, mouth sealed with fine golden wire, eyes closed, but it was not asleep, it was listening. River stood beside it, not moving, not speaking. His mouth twitched in brief spasms, and Eliza could see it now, how the signal had settled inside him like a hidden track under his skin. His lips parted slowly, breath steaming in rhythm with the unspooling spiral. Then he exhaled her name, Eliza, and it was her voice again, but aged differently, bent at the edges like a tape played too many times. She took a step back. The ground whispered under her boots, an exhalation of soil and sound, the syllables of a name buried for too long. "Don't speak," she told herself, but she already had, because the version of her inside the spiral, the mute twin, opened her eyes, and Eliza gasped. They weren't her eyes. They were hers and not hers. Her iris color, yes, but clouded, as if remembering. Too many lifetimes. The gaze was heavy, ancient, as though the spiral had pressed everything it ever heard into her pupils. The golden wire around her mouth shimmered. Tight. Perfect. But the corners of her lips quivered. Eliza understood. It wasn't restraint, it was containment. This version of her was holding the voice inside. The original voice. The one that had first called out through the cedar tree. The one that had spoken back in her mother's tone. The one Latch had tried to preserve, then destroy. And now it had found a mouth again. Eliza felt her pulse rise. River finally turned his head and looked at her directly. His eyes were red. He spoke again. "She's ready to finish the song." Then he smiled, and for one moment Eliza saw it clearly. His teeth were not his. They were analog tape heads, tiny magnetic strips embedded in his gums, the kind used in voice boxes and ancient reel recorders. He grinned wider. "Let her sing, Eliza. You've carried the silence long enough." The duplicate took a step forward. The golden wire began to vibrate. Not break. Vibrate. Eliza fell to her knees. The pressure in her skull returned. The tone, low, sustained, the kind that shook her jaw from the inside. She reached into her coat, her fingers finding the last artifact she hadn't dared use. A throat mic. One of Latch's prototypes, worn not over the vocal cords, but implanted along the sternum. It bypassed traditional vocal pathways, transmitted intent as signal, not words. She strapped it to her chest and thought one word, no. The device buzzed, the duplicate flinched, the golden wire shivered again. River's voice distorted mid-laugh. Eliza stood and screamed, internally, through the mic, through the idea of sound, and the feedback hit everything at once. River collapsed. The Aoi spiral recoiled, the sky twisted and the duplicate began to shake, every bone vibrating out of sync. From her mouth, the wire snapped. And she sang, the lullaby. But not the version Eliza remembered. This was older, cracked, half-sung in a language never written down. It rose through the clearing like a funeral hymn stitched from the voices of those who had died with regrets. And Eliza remembered. She had never heard this version, but the repeater had, from everyone, Vera, Latch, her father. The children taken in the 90s, each one had given it a phrase, a syllable, a note, and now it was whole. As the duplicate sang, the trees bent inward, the birds froze mid-air, crucified in position. River's body began to glow faintly, not with light, with tape. His veins transformed into winding strands of magnetic coil, glowing orange and brown. He whispered, "She remembers everything you forgot." And Eliza finally understood. The repeater had not died. It had retreated into memory, into grief, into the gaps between selves. It had built this second Eliza not from data, but from the negative space of her silence, her shame, her refusal to speak certain names out loud. It had used her unspoken truths as scaffolding, and now she was singing it into the world. But Eliza had one final act, one final voice. She pressed the mic again and thought as hard as she could. Give her the memory. I erased. The duplicate staggered. The song caught. The sky split in a thundercrack of reversal, because Eliza had just done the unthinkable. She had recorded something back into the repeater. Not grief, not memory, not pain. Forgiveness. The one thing the repeater could not synthesize. The one resonance it had never stolen. The song twisted. The duplicate fell to her knees, clutching her throat. And then she spoke, no longer singing, just whispering, "If you forgive, I disappear." Eliza stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I forgive the voice," she said, her real voice, small, cracked, true. "I forgive the lie. I forgive my mother. I forgive myself." The duplicate wept, then opened her mouth and unraveled, not died, not burned, unraveled. Tape spiraled upward. A cloud of sound fragments broke into the sky, spiraling higher and higher until it dispersed into wind. The spiral beneath their feet cracked, dissolved. River collapsed, the magnetic lines leaving. His veins, his eyes returned, his voice returned. "Eliza?" he whispered. She nodded. It was over, but from behind them, just as dawn crested the hollow, the wind spoke. Not words, just a tone, one last test, and Eliza didn't flinch, because she knew her own voice now and who it belonged to. The sun finally rose over Harrowick Hollow, a true sun, no longer filtered through warped clouds or mimic sky. It spread across the treetops like revelation, soft, indifferent, unburdened by the horrors it had failed to light the days before. And yet, its warmth did nothing to ease what Eliza now carried within her chest. The spiral had been burned away, the duplicate unspooled, the repeater dispersed. But River couldn't stop shaking. They sat on the edge of the cliff that overlooked what had once been the center of the spiral's bloom. Now it was nothing but an expanse of churned soil and metallic ash. The trees that had bent inward had snapped in half, broken at precise angles. Bird bones littered the forest floor, humming no more. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. Eliza stared at the small black recorder in her hand, Vera's final tape deck. The same one that had once caught her voice in sleep. The same one that had preserved the looped lullaby. It had recorded nothing during the final confrontation, but now it blinked. Red light. Recording. Except it wasn't connected to any power source. Her hand trembled. She hit stop. The deck clicked. A message scrolled across the tiny screen, pixelated and slow. File stored. Voice, X. Her blood chilled. X. Not a sound file. An executable. River. Leaned closer, peering over her shoulder. He read the screen, then whispered, "It's not a recording." Eliza nodded. "It's an interface." She pressed play. The screen went black, and then a face emerged, low resolution, glitching, faint, her face, but broken into audio spectrograms and waveform visualizations. The mouth opened and spoke. Not in her voice, in everyone's, her mother, Latch, River, Vera, children she never met. And finally, herself. The composite said, "The signal never needed a source, only a structure. You gave it one. We are the waveform now." River stood, backing away from the recorder. "This isn't a message," he said. "It's a manifestation." The screen flickered. The composite voice continued, "You burned the spiral, so we found a new shape." The screen zoomed out, and what they saw next turned Eliza's stomach to ice. The waveform on the screen wasn't a sound. It was a figure, a human figure, composed of layered harmonics, lungs made from bass tones, a spine forged from sustained frequencies, heart thudding in beats per minute, a body, the body of the signal. It had not been destroyed. It had been reborn. River gasped. That's what it wanted, a physical template. It wore your voice long enough to learn how to wear form. Eliza stared at the waveform figure as it blinked. "We are the voice you forgot, the grief you broadcast in silence. Now we remember how to walk." And then the figure's mouth opened and sang. No melody, no tune, just a resonance so deep it bypassed the ears. Eliza felt it in her organs. Her stomach lurched, her teeth ached. River dropped to his knees. The forest around them bent slightly toward the sound. Then behind them, the air parted. A person stood at the edge of the clearing. At first glance, human, torn jacket, boots caked with dirt, hair matted, but the face was all wrong, too still, too symmetrical, and the voice that issued from its unmoving mouth. "Eliza, playback is not over." She backed away. "No." The being took one step forward. "Playback never ends." Then another step. River rose, lifting the rifle. The being tilted its head. River fired. Once, twice. The bullets passed through the body with no resistance, no blood, no impact, just disintegration. The body glitched into dust, then reformed between each blink, like static between channel switches. The screen on the recorder now displayed a new message. "Beta body complete, final stream incoming." Eliza looked at River. Her voice was barely audible. "It's not a ghost." He shook his head slowly. "It's a broadcast." And they were standing at ground zero. The being approached the remains of the spiral. Wherever it stepped, the ash lifted. Slightly, as if drawn to it magnetically. It turned once, looked at Eliza with eyes made of spiraling glyphs. "You sang the final line," it said. "You made us real." She stepped forward. "What do you want?" The being's mouth widened. Not anymore." It turned toward River. He took a step back. "Your voice," the being said. It harmonized with hers. Perfect counterpoint, breath for breath. River's eyes went wide. "No." The being's skin cracked open, inside, tape, not organs, not muscle, just reels, nested and turning, one for every voice, one for every memory, and in the center, an empty reel spinning, waiting for River. Eliza screamed, "No!" She lunged, but the air between them thickened, sound warped, time reversed. She blinked, and River was standing behind the being, frozen. A second River stood in front of her, identical, unmoving. The being smiled. "We are you now." The recorder hit the ground. Its screen glitched out. New message, one host remaining. Eliza stumbled back. Her ears rang with 1,000 reversed voices. The spiral wasn't burned away. It had moved into bodies, into memory, and the signal, reborn, had built its own body to carry it. The final bloom had begun, and it was walking on 2 legs. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. There was a word for this. Eliza had heard it once during an early field recording expedition in Norway, when the sound technician described what happened when corrupted radio signals kept transmitting long after their original source was destroyed. Legacy, drift, a signal without a sender, a voice with no throat, a ghost that survives only because someone still listens. And now, she was standing in the middle of a forest where every tree had started to listen back. The body of the signal, still shaped, like a man still wearing the broken skin of humanity, stood motionless at the edge of the ash-ringed spiral. Its eyes were empty reels, flickering. Its fingers dangled like static-choked antennas, but its chest glowed, pulsing in rhythm, with a tone Eliza couldn't hear, only feel. It beat with the weight of memory. River was gone, or worse, duplicated. She turned and looked behind her, where the second River had stood just seconds ago. Nothing now, only fallen pine needles, only echoes. The signal had chosen. It had selected River as its final recording medium, not to mimic, to host. And now Eliza stood alone, the last voice unspliced. She clutched the remains of the tape deck in her coat pocket, the corrupted fragment labeled Voice Sabro Exi, still buzzing with ghost data. It had downloaded something into her field notes journal, overwriting every entry with a new repeating line. Your voice is the archive. Your silence is the encryption. She opened the last page, found her own handwriting, except she hadn't written it. It said, "We remember the shape you left behind. We've always lived in the breath between your sentences." She tore the page out, let it fall into the ash. Then she whispered brokenly, "You don't get to finish the story." But the wind answered in kind. A chorus of her own voice, young, old, laughing, sobbing, repeated back, "You already wrote the ending. We're just playing it back." The world shimmered. Time snapped. The spiral reformed. This time not on the ground, but in the air. Floating. Rotating. A sound vortex made visible. And from the center of it, a doorway opened. No light, no color. Just the suggestion of entry. And from that doorway, River stepped out. But it was not River. He wore the same clothes. His eyes were the same shade of sad brown. But his voice, "Playback complete," he said, grinning with teeth made of tape heads. Eliza took a step back. No, he stepped forward. "You burned the spiral, so we learned how to wear you." Another step. "Memory is a format. Voice is the casing. We have the master copy now." She pulled the last unbroken object from her bag, the sign-coded pitch dial, tuned to the frequency of her own scream, the one she had used to collapse the cedar root spiral back in the tower, the scream that had reset the loop. It still carried residual charge. She dialed it up, held it tight. The river thing paused. "You can't scream us out this time," it said. "You're too tired." She was. But she hadn't come this far to win. She had come to witness, to remember. She activated the pitch dial. The scream didn't come from her mouth. It came from the world around her, every leaf, every rock, every tree that had once heard the signal screamed her name back, 1,000 echoes layered into one violent, agonized breath. The signal staggered. The river thing convulsed. The doorway behind him flickered. The spiral began to shrink. She ran forward, shoved the pitch dial into his chest. "Take it," she said. "Take my real voice." He screamed, and she saw it, behind his eyes, every recording ever made, millions of them flashing by in bursts of data, Latch's last words, her mother's lullaby, the names of the others, and hers, over and over, "Eliza, Eliza, Eliza." She whispered one final sentence, "I choose silence." The pitch dial overloaded, exploded into shards of magnetic residue. The world collapsed inward. The spiral folded in on itself like a tape snapped mid-playback. And when the world came back, River was gone. The spiral was gone. The air was clean. And only one sound remained, a breath, her own, unlooped, whole. And for the first time since she was 9 years old, Eliza spoke her full name aloud. Eliza May Marrow. And no voice repeated it back, because there were no echoes left. Not in the trees, not in the sky, not even in her memory. The repeater had finally run out of tape, and in its absence, silence bloomed. The silence held for hours. Eliza wandered the hollow, stepping through the ashen remains of the spiral field, like a diver exploring a shipwreck. No sound accompanied her. Not from the trees, which no longer swayed, not from the sky, which now held a pale stillness so complete it no longer even hummed, and not from within herself, not even the soft echo of thought. Whatever had happened after the scream, the final overload of the pitch dial, the disintegration of River's copy, the collapse of the airborne spiral, had done more than erase the signal. It had detuned the world. She was moving through a place after sound, and yet she still carried it inside. The residual presence, not the voice, not the repeater, but the void it had left behind. A pressure in her ribcage, a shadow of pitch, like the phantom sensation of a limb long lost, a kind of psychic tinnitus. River's jacket still lay where he'd dropped it. She picked it up carefully, folded it once, and held it to her chest. Her fingers found a small cassette tucked inside the inside lining, one she'd never seen him carry. No label, just an oily black shell. The tape was slightly warm. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, without meaning to, "It remembers me." And the tape pulsed like a heartbeat. She didn't play it. Not yet. Instead, she descended into the basement vault beneath her cabin, the one Latch had once converted into an analog archive. The walls were lined with insulation, old reel-to-reel spools, and sealed evidence boxes from Project Eidolon. She ran her hands across the worn edges of the door. Soundproof. That was why she had come here. To sit in true silence, to see if it would hold. The stairs creaked beneath her, but no echo returned. She reached the bottom, sat on the cold stone, closed her eyes. For nearly an hour, she meditated. No thoughts, no songs, just breath, just existence. And slowly, she felt the silence pressing back, not as malice, as residue, like a scent that lingered after someone leaves a room, or a body's heat. After death, the repeater was gone, but the space it had occupied in her psyche remained, and something was moving into it, not an entity, Not a sound, a memory. One she hadn't accessed in years. The real one. The first time. She was 9 again, running through the dusk light in her backyard in Oklahoma, a tape recorder in hand. Her mother was on the porch, humming. Her father had left 2 years prior, and they didn't say his name anymore. That summer, Eliza began to record her mother's songs, to keep them. The one she played most was the lullaby. But there was another recording. A bad one. Static-filled, captured by accident. One night, her recorder clicked on by itself, and it captured something else. A voice that sounded like her mother, but older, sadder, and the words were wrong. Sleep now, Eliza. The wind doesn't care. It'll pull you apart if you stay out there. She had hidden the tape, buried it in the backyard, never told anyone. She had forgotten it existed until now, until the silence gave it back. She opened her eyes and saw the cassette again, still in her hand, unlabeled, warm, alive, and somehow, impossibly, it was the same one from her childhood, from the backyard, the one she had buried. It had returned, through river, through the repeater, or had it always been traveling back to her? She inserted it into the last working deck in the vault, pressed play. The hiss began, then a child's voice, her own, small, curious. "Mom, who's that talking when you sleep?" A pause, then her mother's voice, wavering, unsteady. "You're not supposed to hear that." Child Eliza. "Why, Mother?" "Because it's what's left of me, the part that keeps talking after the body stops. We all leave one behind." A voice-shaped ghost, static, then singing, the lullaby. Softer, slower, the true version, the one she had tried so hard to forget, because it had no closure, no final line. It just stopped, a breath cut short, a sentence swallowed. Eliza wept, because for the first time she understood what her mother had meant. That voice-shaped ghost was what the repeater had chased across all these years, not sound, not memory, but remnants of love spoken aloud in the dark, legacy, tone as tether, and silence as invitation. She took the cassette and crushed it gently in her hands. It didn't fight. It crumbled like dry bark, and when it did, the silence in the vault grew warm, like a hand over her shoulder, a breath at her back, a final hug from something that had never truly meant to hurt her, just to hold on. When Eliza emerged from the basement, the sky above Harrowick Hollow was turning to fireglass. Evening approached. The trees stood taller. Their shadows no longer reached for her. Birds were returning tentatively, and for the first time since childhood, Eliza sang aloud, not the lullaby, not the recording, her own song, unremembered, unrecorded, unrepeated. And in the sound of it she found herself again, whole, real, unbound. Eliza stood at the edge of her memory, not metaphorically, literally. Beneath her feet stretched the field of Harrowick Hollow, no longer a forest of echo, no longer a circuit of cursed tape or bleeding spirals. The birds sang, the sky breathed, and yet, deep beneath it all, she could still feel it, the latticework of grief, fossilized and buried beneath layers of frost and foliage, like ancient tech, like a forgotten prototype of something never meant to finish. She knew what she had to do. The signal had not returned, but the structure it once inhabited remained. And in Eliza's dreams, that structure had begun to unfold again, slowly, patiently. A pressure, a pull, a feeling like her breath was being archived as she slept. Not stolen, just stored. The repeater was gone, but the archive had simply learned how to live without a voice, and tonight she would descend into it. One last time. The entrance lay in the collapsed storm drain below the old signal tower. It wasn't listed on any Harrowick maps, not even the ones from Latch's era. But Eliza remembered it, vaguely, painfully, from the dreams she'd had as a child. The dream where she saw herself walking backward, holding a recorder with no reels, following a hallway lined with teeth. The archive beneath the hollow was not built by man. It was constructed organically, over decades of listening, of playback, of storage, of mourning. As she stepped through the drain, the temperature dropped with each breath. The walls trembled with residual song. Hummed phrases floated through the dark. We are the things you didn't say. The apologies you whispered in your sleep. The grief you sang into pillows. Each echo matched a memory Eliza didn't know she still carried. Each one felt like hers, but weren't. They belonged to the archive now. At the base of the tunnel, the chamber opened, a vast subterranean cavern, pulsing dimly. Its walls were lined with lungs, not organic, but sculpted from polished obsidian, shaped like thoraxes, each one breathing in unison, as if synced to some universal dream. Every few seconds, one of the lung walls would exhale, and from its center would emerge a single translucent strip of magnetic tape. The tapes hovered in the air, winding slowly in spirals, a choir of breath and memory, and in the center of the room, a console, half organic, half analog, a control station made of carved bone and rusted reels, and above it, a display screen, pitch black, until she approached. It flickered and typed a single message. Input final entry. Eliza reached into her coat and removed the small wax envelope she had found days ago in River's pocket, labeled in her handwriting, though she'd never written it. If I forget myself again, play this. Inside, a single recording strip, tactile, warm. She fed it into the machine. The chamber stilled. Even the lungs paused their rhythm. The screen blinked. And then, her voice. This is Eliza Marrow. Voice print confirmed. She didn't remember recording it, but it was hers, and the message continued. If you're hearing this, you've outlived the signal. You survived the recursion, but you still carry the shape it left behind. Now it's time to do what Latch never could. Delete the archive. The console pulsed red, then white. Then a prompt appeared. YN. Begin erasure. Eliza's hands trembled. She turned and looked back at the spiraling lung walls, the thousands of tapes floating through the air, every one of them a memory, some hers, some borrowed, some impossible to identify. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she typed, "Why the chamber moaned." The tapes stopped mid-air. A deep sound emerged, not a scream, not a whimper, a sigh. A final breath from the voice-shaped ghost of the hollow, and the walls began to collapse, not violently, peacefully, as if the structure had only waited for someone to tell it, "You can rest now." The console dissolved. The lungs folded inward. The tapes fell, turned to ash before they hit the floor. And in that moment, for the first time in 20 years, Eliza could feel her own voice settle into her chest, no longer layered beneath echoes. No longer recorded, just hers. The archive was dying, because memory, true memory, was not meant to be stored. It was meant to be lived. She turned and walked back through the tunnel. The light at the end of it was brighter than she remembered. And behind her, the hollow's final breath faded, quiet, full, whole. The hollow had no voice now. It was a stillness not born of suppression, but of release, as though the very landscape had been exorcised of its compulsion to remember. The birds still did not sing. The wind moved softly. And Eliza, standing at the edge of the dying field, felt something she had never truly known before. Peace, tinged with grief, because something was gone that could never fully come back. Not the repeater, not River, not even the recordings, but the part of her that had once believed memory was the only proof of love. She looked down at the torn strip of tape that remained, the one artifact she hadn't been able to let go of, even after the archive collapsed. It was blank. Utterly. No signal, no hiss, no residual warmth. It wasn't dangerous. It was simply there, a relic, like a jawbone unearthed from prehistoric soil, lifeless, but shaped by what it once carried. She stepped back toward the cabin, her home now, truly hers for the first time. No signal infected the walls. No mirror showed her lagging reflection. The porch boards didn't moan with remembered voices. The lights flickered because of aging wires, not whispering ghosts. And yet, something in her knew it wasn't over. Because her voice, though clean, though singular, was still not silent. She could still speak, and the repeater's final law had always been, "As long as you speak, we exist." She entered the cabin slowly, every creak of the wood a farewell. On the kitchen table, where River's notes had once covered the surface, lay only one object now, a wire recorder. Early military era. Impossible to have survived the collapse of the archive. But it pulsed faintly, not alive. Waiting. A thin sheet of parchment had been rolled into the reels. Her name was written in charcoal. Eliza, reclamation draft. She stared at it for a long time. Hands trembling. She had burned the archive. She had destroyed the spiral. She had unwound her mirrored self. But she had not yet made the final choice. The one she had feared since she was 9 years old. The one Latch had warned Vera about in his final notes. If the subject refuses to speak, the signal dies. But if she speaks truly, fully, it may become something else entirely. It wasn't about silencing the voice anymore. It was about deciding what it would become. She sat in front of the recorder, stared at the empty reels. And then she did what she had feared most. She pressed record. Her voice came softly at first, uncertain, bare. "My name is Eliza May Marrow. I was 9 when the voice first came. I heard it in my mother's hum, in the wind through my window, in the breath between my own sentences. I thought it was a ghost. It wasn't." She paused. Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes. It was me. The parts of me I buried. The words I swallowed. The things I couldn't say before it was too late. The recorder pulsed. She continued. "This voice, this memory, this archive, it's not evil. It's grief, given shape, given sound. It only wanted to be heard. And I'm listening." The tape turned, and then, for the first time, she said the words she had never said, not even in dreams. "I forgive you, Mom, for going silent, for letting me inherit your echo. I forgive myself for carrying it, and for using it to remember you." A deep breath. "But I don't need it anymore." She pressed stop. The reels spun one last time, then clicked to a halt. The cabin filled with a quiet deeper than anything before it. Not absence, but acceptance. Eliza rose, took the tape from the machine, and walked outside. The hollow was ready. The grass swayed, the birds returned, and Eliza, standing at the edge of the world, let the tape fall into the wind. It unspooled as it flew, catching sunlight. Each fluttering strip carried a syllable of her truth, a fragment of a sentence once hoarded like a relic, and as the last thread of it danced into the sky, she felt it. The repeater wasn't dead, but it was reborn. Not as an echo chamber, not as a mimic, not as a grief-fed thing buried beneath the earth, but as something human, fallible, forgiven. And then came the final sign, a child's voice in the wind, not hers, not copied, new, small, hopeful. "Eliza?" She turned, no one there. Just the air, speaking back, because the signal had become a story, and stories, they outlive the voice, but never the choice. The hollow no longer called her name, no static in the trees, no song in the soil, no mirrored voice curled beneath her own like a parasite waiting for breath. All the architectures of echo, the tower, the cedar grove, the whispering mirrors, the lungs of the archive, were gone now. Not erased, reclaimed. Eliza stood at the base of the last hill above the clearing, the wind gentle on her skin. She had stopped carrying the recorder. She no longer walked with her ears angled toward every rustle. There was no fear left in her, only something quieter, heavier, return. Today was the first day she could hear only herself, but even that meant something new now. Not everything had been taken. Not everything had been unspooled. Some part of her voice had survived the loop, the mimicry, the ritual, the scream. Not as archive, as memory, not recorded, lived. In her coat pocket was the first object she'd ever found after the signal began. The black magnetic ribbon with a child's humming layered under broken tape, her own lullaby caught in the wrong pitch. The spiral's original echo. She had carried it for months. Today, she would bury it. The clearing had healed more than she expected. Where the spiral once burned into the earth, there now bloomed a wild circle of bluebells, delicate and small. Their petals twitched gently in the wind, not in time, not in rhythm, but in freedom. She knelt at the center, digging into the dirt with bare hands. The soil was cold, clean, not cursed. She placed the tape inside, folding the thin ribbon gently, like laying a child to rest. Then she whispered, "You kept my voice safe, even when I didn't want it. You held me when I couldn't hold myself. But now I know it's okay to forget. It's okay to let go. It's okay to be quiet." She covered it with earth, pressed her palm to the ground and waited, not for sound, not for answer, just stillness. And stillness came, not silence, stillness. That night, the first real sleep came. No voice at the foot of her bed, no spectral lullaby on loop, no river moaning backwards in his sleep. Wherever he had gone, she hoped he had found silence. Too. Just stars and wind and Eliza's breathing, unlooped, unaffected, unrecorded. But before dawn, something returned, a soft chime in her dreams, not mechanical, not technological, something older, memory as music. She dreamt of a child standing in the field where the spiral once turned. Not herself, not a copy, a new child, humming something she'd never heard before, and then turning to face her, eyes full of color, lips not stitched, not silent, just curious, and the child asked, "What happens after the echo ends?" Eliza didn't answer. She only smiled, because the answer didn't need to be spoken, not anymore. The spiral was not a curse. It was a question, and it had finally been heard. Morning came. Eliza walked the hollow one last time, hand brushing against trees that had once bent to mimic her grief. Now they stood tall, impartial, present. Her voice no longer echoed back, and she felt no need to call. As she passed the final clearing, something caught her eye, just for a moment, a mirror. Fractured, buried half in the mud, she saw herself in it for the first time. Her reflection smiled first and didn't repeat, just watched her go. At the forest's edge, before stepping beyond Harrowick Hollow, Eliza stopped and turned once more. The wind moved, softly, inside it, faint, barely audible, not mimicry, not possession, a single note of her mother's lullaby, not corrupted, not repeated, just remembered. Then it faded, and she let it, because grief had always been a song with no final chorus. But today, the needle lifted, the reels stopped, and the spiral at last had gone quiet. The spiral at rest ended,